Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna start a new movie, What If Naruto Felt the Touch of a Goddess, Part 1. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you'll never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
The touch of a god or goddess, something that no human being should mess with or cross. You would go crazy if someone touched you or even just looked at you. The touch of a god or goddess. People who cross paths with a woman who could tear the world apart without a care in the world are blessed. The touch of a god or goddess. As a child, you hear stories about people like Kaguya Otsutsuki, people who are able to make stars, making moons, take charge of space and time. But because you didn't believe them, you often wrote them off as fairy tales. If you haven't been through something, you can't understand it. If you haven't seen something for yourself, you can't believe it. The touch of a god or goddess. As Sasuke, this is not good. Silence. It was very, very quiet. The blue eyes were fixed on the someone or something that was floating just a few feet off the ground. A beautiful creature that could have only been made by the primordials from long ago. A woman. No. She wasn't a girl. The person tried again. Sasuke, hey, answer me. Naruto, shut up. When his best friend spoke in a quiet way, Naruto, who had just gotten his name, gritted his teeth and kept quiet. He didn't want to take his eyes off of the goddess in front of him, but he could tell that Sasuke was having trouble inside. He also wasn't sure of himself. As the pale-skinned woman finally moved, Naruto had to physically stop his hands from shaking. Her white hair moved gracefully as her head jerked to where they were. She just looked, and stared, and stared, and stared. Before the end, Tenji, the goddess with pale skin, asked quietly, with a hint of sadness in her voice. Naruto didn't notice until much later that the woman was looking at him instead of Sasuke. When this woman forced her will on him, his spine tingled and he clenched his hands nervously. Naruto swallowed nervously as the woman's sad eyes grew smaller and her face changed into a sad look. Her small eyebrows were close together, and her eyes were shining. Who was Tenji? Even now, he said, you stand defiant. His sad face slowly faded, and a sad one took its place. I did what I thought was right, but you still judge me so harshly. Naruto swallowed nervously again as he looked at Sasuke, who was holding his kusanagi with both hands. Before Naruto could say anything, he was cut off by someone else. Mom, that's not right. The creature stopped moving when the goddess with pale skin opened her chakra. The world felt the woman's power as it spread around the world, swallowing it whole and drowning it in a pit of despair. Naruto's heart hurt and he had to fight the urge to get down on his knees. What the heck is this? Even Madara Uchiha wasn't this strong. This woman was way above everyone else. She whispered angrily, silence, as her eyes moved toward the black blob of chakra. As she looked at Zetsu, the veins around her eyes stood out. After a moment of silence, she said, he is Tenji. He has the power of my sons. I'd never forget those eyes, she said with a sad voice. Naruto swallowed his worry and then let out a soft sigh. He started to slow down his breathing as he pushed away all of the bad feelings that were coming from the goddess. Once he was calm, he put his hand on Sasuke's shoulder and started to send his chakra through him to calm him down. The blonde teen nodded to his friend, and his friend did the same thing back. Slowly, he turned his attention back to the goddess, who was floating in the air, and then he pulled on his ruined mesh shirt. The fabric barely stayed on his body, and it was full of holes and tears. His orange pants were torn and shred, and only covered the bottom of his knees. There were several tears across the thighs. He gave Sasuke a quick look and nodded his head before letting out his own chakra. A golden cloak of chakra lit up around his body, giving him a light that was as bright as the sun. As Naruto's chakra fought back against Kaguya's depressing and bad feelings, a feeling of peace spread through the area. His presence, which was so bright and loving, was very different from Kaguya's. 7 pitch-black orbs slowly appeared behind Naruto's back and began to move in a way that was almost hypnotic. One of the orbs slowly moved out of its group and landed on Naruto's hand. The Gyutadama started to change into a thin staff that spun quickly. It started to change into a new form. Naruto took a quick look at the thing before grabbing it and spinning it in his hand. He let out one last breath and then looked straight into the goddess' eyes. I don't know who Tenji is, but he seems like someone important to you. The woman didn't answer, instead choosing to stare at the person she thought was her ex-lover. Naruto looked at his best friend and quietly nodded his head. Something happened that wasn't said, and Sasuke let go of his kusanagi. Before he spoke again, the young man in the golden cloak put his staff on his shoulder. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. My grandfather told me about you. He said you were a monster with no feelings. Naruto noticed the change in feelings right away. Her sad face stayed the same, but Naruto could feel the anger underneath. The woman started to slowly go down, but she never took her eyes off Naruto. But that can't be right, can it? He asked rhetorically, his eyes hardening. She did not answer. I can feel way too many feelings coming from you. Sadness, anger, regret. As he spoke, his eyebrows furrowed. You actually know what you're doing, unlike Madara. Before Kaguya turned her head, she was silent for what seemed like hours. You even speak like him. After she said that, there was a terrible pause, and what happened next even surprised Naruto. I won't do the same wrong thing twice. When the pale-skinned woman stood in front of Naruto, his eyes grew so big that it was impossible. What? When was she move? You would never get his answer. Naruto. Naruto heard Sasuke scream, but he didn't do anything about it. Then, a cone of black surrounded his vision, blocking out all light and taking away all of his senses. I will fix what you did wrong. After I clean up this world, Tenji, we will be together again. I promise. Naruto heard Kaguya's voice, but he didn't know where it was coming from. Black was everywhere he looked. Black. Hate, sadness, loneliness, anger, rage, depression. Every emotion he had learned to control during his hard training to become a sage hit him like one of Tsunade's overpowering punches. This wasn't how he felt. Naruto closed his eyes and started to pay attention to the chaos inside Kaguya. He would usually freak out and scream about how unfair life was, but now wasn't the time. He could still think, and even though he wasn't sure what was going on, he thought he must be in Kaguya's subconscious, or at least a part of it. He knew that he was in some way cut off from the outside world, but he could still think, and that was enough for him. Okay, think. Shit. What did he even think? Idiot. As his breathing slowed down, he began to use his chakra. Slowly, he put his hands together and dipped his head. He had to keep his cool. Sasuke put his trust in him. The rest of the world was too. That takes away the worry. Breathe. In, out. You'll be lucky to get out of this shithole, he said. Naruto didn't listen to his partner's voice. Instead, he tried to get a feel for his surroundings. He got nothing at all, which was only a little bit annoying. Okay, so it was clear that wouldn't work. Breathe. In, out. As he turned his head, his blonde hair moved around. Breathe. In, out. Ah, how she felt. Naruto opened up his chakra, or at least he thought he did, and picked up on Kaguya's feelings. He sorted through the waves of bad feelings without much trouble and found unique. He couldn't explain what he was feeling because he didn't have any real senses, but if he could, he would say it was like a ribbon. A ribbon that went from one ribbon to another and back again. Breathe. In, out. Naruto took a quiet breath out and then pulled on the ribbon. Nothing. Welp. That wasn't. In front of his face, a bright flash of white light exploded. His eyes closed on their own because of what was happening. After a few moments of silence, he heard a voice he knew, but this time it was filled with anger instead of sadness. Ishiki. When the woman yelled, Naruto slowly opened his eyes and tilted his head as if he didn't understand. He blinked several times as he watched the scene unfold in front of him. Was this from the past? Another pale-skinned man was being hatefully looked at by a Kaguya who looked very different. The man's face was covered in darkness, but Naruto could see a single horn that wrapped around his head from his right ear and curled behind his head. He wore a kimono with a very high collar that was open at the chest. This showed off his pale skin and toned body. His kimono was white, and there was nothing on the front of it. Ishiki made fun of Princess Kaguya by saying, "She's so weak and sad. Are you still running away from Mamashiki?" Kaguya gave the man a mean look, but she didn't try to fight him. "How did you find me?" The man with pale skin slowly went around Kaguya, a thing that scared the woman and made her shake. "Izzy, you're not good at hiding tracks," he said with a loud snort before putting his fingers on the woman's shoulder. "Mamashiki asked me to bring you to him." Ishiki didn't care that the woman looked scared as his hand painfully squeezed her shoulder, but he looked into her eyes and gave her a sick smile. "I like to see you suffer like the scum you are, so go. Run like your life depends on it." He let go of the woman's shoulder and pushed her away with force. "Run, little Kaguya, run." The woman didn't waste any time and ran as fast as she could right away. Even Naruto couldn't make out her shape, and he had to squint to keep the woman in his sights. After a few seconds of silence, the pale-skinned man laughed out loud. "Oh, Mamashiki, you really messed this one up, didn't you? Urashiki won't be happy." After he said what he said, the man seemed to just fade away. As he went away, his body turned into nothing but dust and soot. Ishiki, Mamashiki, Urashiki, the number of these beings. Those things scared Kaguya. Naruto squeezed his eyes shut and tightened his grip on his hair as he tried to stop his mind from going crazy. If they were able to deal with Kaguya, which is a very big if, then they would have to deal with 3 more people just like Kaguya. What's going on? Is this some kind of sick joke? Naruto let out a startled yelp as another bright white flash exploded in front of him. His arms were crossed in front of his face to protect his eyes from the bright light. When the light went out, he slowly put his arms down and tilted his head in a curious way. Tenji-kun, do you really have to leave? Naruto's eyes got bigger as he looked at Tenji, a man with fair skin. He had black hair and wore it in a different way than most people. He wore a straw headband that wrapped around his forehead and a Magatama medallion on a string around his neck. Before he spoke, Tenji gave his lover a soft smile and turned toward her. I have to, my love, because these peace talks are important. Kaguya let out a quiet sigh as she looked at the floor. The people from the land of that are barbarians. They can't see sense and can only think violently. As the man kneeled in front of his lover, Kaguya felt soft hands on her own. If we don't try, Kaguya-chan, we'll never know. Don't you want peace? Her white eyes looked straight into his for a few seconds before she shyly turned away. She spoke softly after nodding her head. Of course, but putting your life in danger. What if you die? Tenji softly rubbed his lover's hands, and then he smiled again, which was so warm and loving. Then I'll take that risk for what I believe in. I'll find peace. Do you know why, my love? Kaguya's face turned into a small smile as her eyes slowly moved up and focused on his. Because you always keep your promises. The man smiled and nodded, then slowly closed his eyes and leaned toward his lover. As Kaguya pulled his body close to hers, his lips gently curved around hers. Naruto watched the scene in front of him with a mix of feelings. He was well aware of how much he and the man named Tenji were alike. They never break their word. Check. Looking for peace. Check. Willing to risk their lives for their people and for their home. Check. Willing to talk to their enemies in order to make peace. Check. He now sort of understood why Kaguya had called him Tenji. But she didn't know him at all. How had she broken him down so much with just a look? How could she have known that he was like the man who had been her lover before he died? It didn't make sense. Those eyes would stay with me forever. That Auntie Tsunade used to say, the eyes are the window to the soul. So maybe she saw inside him. So, before he could think about it more, there was another flash of light in front of him. This time, the bright light did not bother Naruto, and he did not run away. Once the bright lights went out, Naruto's face turned into a deep frown. Why did you betray me, Tenji? Now, Kaguya looked like how he had seen her when he was in Madara's body. Why did you do it? Was peace more important than your love? I loved you. I put you first, above everything. She screamed as tears ran down her face. They hurt me, and you punish me. After all I've done for you, she cried, and her tears ran down her chin and gathered on Tenji's face. His body didn't move at all, and he didn't look at anything. Kaguya grabbed the man's wrist and put it on her stomach while she cried out loud. Why you made me do it, Tenji, can you feel them? Your children, you would have killed your pregnant lover. She screamed into the sky for several minutes as rain started to fall slowly. As Naruto looked at Kaguya with sad eyes, he could feel every emotion. It hit him right in the middle and went deep into his chest. He didn't even notice that tears were slowly rolling down his cheeks. Why did this make him feel so bad? He didn't even know Kaguya existed until a few hours before he was supposed to fight Madara. Why was this bothering him? Why did he care so much about her life right now, seeing some of her most important and personal memories buried deep in her mind? Did this explain it? Possibly. Naruto started to wipe his eyes and moved slowly closer to Kaguya. Her head was resting on the man's chest, and she cried in a sad way. A way he wouldn't have thought would come from a person with a lot of power. It showed him that she wasn't so different from people after all. She had feelings, and she felt just as strongly as everyone else. Her pain was just as bad as that of others, she thought, and it hurt her. But the way Hagoromo talked about her made her sound like an evil monster who couldn't be talked to. Naruto could not see that at all. The information that Super Gramps had given him about Kaguya had given him a very clear picture of who she was supposed to be. A lifeless shell of the person she used to be. She is determined to destroy the world by controlling the people and taking chakra for herself. But that doesn't what he was able to feel. She was in bad shape, shaped by the harsh and unforgiving world she saw around her. Even now, seeing this scene with her dead lover was a painful reminder that bad things happen to people and shape who they become. Your ideas could change at any moment and you wouldn't even notice. Naruto could understand Kaguya because he really felt sorry for her. But he felt sorry for everyone. He was the kind of person who would do that. He saw the best in everyone. That doesn't mean he didn't see the bad in people. But he didn't want to be someone who judged them based on one thing they did. In this world, everyone could be bad. Everyone. Even he could have done it. Almost broke him when he found out that Auntie Tsunade had died during Nagato's first attack. Even now, his heart still hurt, and he didn't think it would ever stop. He had planned to kill Nagato for real. To make the man pay for hurting the one person in his life who was the most important to him. And he was almost. He had the man by the throat and would have broken it if Conan hadn't stopped him. She pleaded and begged, pleaded. At the time, it made him even more angry. Why did this woman beg this monster to stay alive? Didn't she just see him kill a lot of innocent people, without any shame? And she was ready to beg and plead for his life. What stopped him from killing was what Jiraiya had taught him. Killing to get even won't bring back what you've lost. Auntie Tsunade wouldn't have wanted him to see him that way. She knew him better than anyone else. He never had a mother. Naruto got down on his knees slowly and put his hands on his thighs. He stared at Kaguya's sobbing body for a long time before slowly putting out his hand to touch her. His hand didn't touch her, it just went right through her. As he pulled his hand away from the goddess, a small frown appeared on his face. I swear to you, Tenji, the woman whispered between sobs. I'll do everything I can to make this world a better place. She sniffled softly and then gently kissed the man on the lips. When she lifted her head, it almost looked like she was staring right at Naruto, as if she could see him somehow. Naruto looked into her eyes and could see the changes happening. This was the event that made Kaguya into a different person. Hagoromo thought she was a monster, so he turned her into one. But Naruto was smarter than that. He didn't agree with her because he thought her methods were cruel, but he did understand her, knew why she was doing what she was doing. He knew how far she had gone and how far she would go in the end to reach her goal. Naruto covered his eyes as his body was hit by another flash of white light. He didn't say anything for a few minutes before slowly taking his arms off of his face. His blue eyes looked around him with a little bit of wonder. Bright iridescent lights shone in a space that was empty and dark. There were no shapes or landmarks that stood out, but beautiful colors were all around him. He slowly got to his feet and looked around at all this empty space. You understand me? Naruto's eyes got bigger as he turned on his heel and faced Kaguya. The goddess with the horns was a few feet away and was staring at him with her eyes half closed. Naruto didn't say anything for a while after he realized this wasn't a memory. This was happening. Before he spoke, he quietly licked his lips. Yes, I do. Kaguya moved forward one step. But you do not agree. Naruto shook his head slowly and made a small frown. No, I don't. This is not how it works. Kaguya moved forward another step. If you know what I mean, you know this is the only way. As he crossed his arms across his chest, his face started to get more serious. No, Kaguya, it's not. You've lost your humanity. She took another step toward him, slowly getting closer to him. I was never a person in the first place. Naruto shook his head as if that fact didn't bother him. No matter if she was a person or not, she had feelings and could think. You don't have to be human to know what's right and what's wrong. Kaguya, you know this is wrong. The slow shaking of Kaguya's head made her long hair move back and forth. She closed her eyes and smiled in a sad way. She moved another step toward him. I know it's not right, but I've already chosen this path. Naruto answered with a deep frown. You can change, Kaguya. This isn't the way to make the world a better place. You're taking away our freedom. That's not peace, it's slavery. For a moment, her sad smile was strained, and her eyes shone with tears that she hadn't yet let fall. As she took another step toward Naruto, who was now within reach, her head shook. Slowly, tears ran down her face, and she gave off an air of sadness that was hard to describe. It hit Naruto, who took the strong feelings without any trouble. The goddess asked rhetorically, how else can I save a world full of hate and death? She didn't expect an answer. This time, Naruto was the one who moved toward Kaguya. His taller height made him slightly bigger than the goddess with the horns. With a soft smile on his face, he reached out his hand to the woman. He answered softly, through love and understanding. His smile was so bright that it set the world around them on fire, changing the colors to warm reds and oranges. Kaguya's eyes wandered around the empty void of space as Naruto's presence started to wash away her bad feelings. His bright, loving energy surrounded her and slowly washed away all of her worries and fears. As she fell, Kaguya's face changed into a look of pain. As she spoke, she moved a half step away from the 17-year-old. I can't know, humanity is poison. As he moved one step closer to Kaguya, Naruto's face didn't change at all. He was now standing right in front of her, with only a couple of inches between them. Do you really believe that, Kaguya, or is the pain talking? Naruto's aura hit Kaguya with the force of 1,000 suns and showed no sign of slowing down. As she basked in the calming energy of his chakra, her will wavered for a moment. As she looked into his blue eyes, tears started to slowly run down her beautiful face. She whispered with a pitiful tone and a painfully scrunched up face, trying desperately to get away from his enticing presence. No, don't. Stop, please. Naruto's eyes crinkled a little and his smile softened. Slowly, he wrapped his arms around her, ignoring her feeble attempts to get away. Trust me, Kaguya. I know it's scary, but believe me when I say I can change this world, and I will. He squeezed her hard and saw that she had stopped fighting him. "Do you know why I'm not quitting?" Even though she was crying, Kaguya didn't answer. She closed her eyes and pressed her face into the boy's chest, knowing what he was going to say. "Because I keep my promises." As soon as he said those words, the world around him seemed to fall apart. Slowly, the colors started to fall apart, and a huge flash of white light erupted around Kaguya and Naruto. Sasuke huffed loudly as sweat ran down his body. His mismatched eyes looked at Kaguya from behind his perfect Susanoo, and he took a deep breath. He shouted in his mind, "Come on, Naruto. Hurry up and finish whatever you're doing." He had been fighting Kaguya for the better part of an hour, but he had never been able to hit her. Even though Naruto was probably trying to distract her, he couldn't hit her. Her strength was amazing. He might have had a better chance of winning if Naruto had been with him. Sasuke sighed quietly as a bow formed in his Susanoo. The huge chakra construct pulled on the strings of the ranged weapon as a mass of black fire formed into an arrow. Amaterasu's flames burned with a thirst that could not be satisfied. As the flames got more chaotic, Sasuke's Rinnegan started to pulse. He told his Susanoo in his mind to draw back the bow even more before aiming at the goddess. Inton, Susanoo Kagetsuchi. The arrow was released just as a sonic boom exploded from Sasuke's position, destroying mountains and completely destroying the land around him. Kaguya didn't move to avoid the attack. Instead, she just stared at the fast-approaching flaming arrow. Before the arrow hit her chest, her head was tilted. After a short period of silence, the arrow exploded in a tornado of flames. It turned so fast and hard that the land around Kaguya turned to ash right away. Sasuke roared loudly and clenched his fist as Amaterasu's tornado collapsed on itself. A huge amount of smoke and ash exploded outwards, filling the sky and making the world even darker. The last Uchiha waited with bated breath, and his heart stopped for a moment, as Kaguya slowly floated out of the smokescreen without getting hot or burning. What the fuck? Sasuke's hands were clenched so tightly that blood started to leak from them. This couldn't really be happening. His first solid attack on the woman had no effect at all. She was literally working it off by walking. Was it actually helpless? Did he actually have no chance against her? Sasuke's teeth chattered as his Susanoo slowly disappeared. As Sasuke slowly floated toward the burned earth, the chakra structure that looked like the Titanic started to fall apart. Sweat gathered at his feet and slowly dripped down his face, splashing quietly into the ground. The goddess didn't move and just kept staring blankly at his form. Was she doing? He found out the answer when a black man portal. Suddenly, something appeared right behind her. She slowly floated into the portal and vanished. His eyes got bigger as she disappeared completely. Sasuke tried to find her by using all of his senses. Before he could even respond, it was over. A delicate hand grabbed his chin, and he went completely still. Sasuke's heart skipped a beat as the woman slowly walked out of the small hole in space right in front of him. He hadn't even sensed her. If Sasuke had control over his body, he would have raised his eyebrows when he saw the woman's sad face. She was crying. Why? He felt her fingers caress his cheeks gently, but she didn't move to hit him. What was she doing? She had no chance of winning. What was she waiting for? Why the hell was she crying? "Please stop," he said. He heard her softly begging. Was she actually talking to him? It didn't feel like it. It was almost as though she was talking to someone else. Because you never break promises. Sasuke could feel Kaguya's chakra heating up, and a bright flash of light erupted from her body a second later. He was blasted away from the woman and skittered along the ground several times. He rolled for a while before taking his Kusanagi out of its sheath and stabbing it into the ground. Both of his hands were on the handle of his sword, and he slowly got up on one knee while looking at the dust that was being kicked up by Kaguya. Using his Daojutsu, he slowly moved his chest up and down as he looked into the smoke and dust. When he finally managed to look into the dust, his eyes got even bigger. He saw Naruto holding Kaguya and comforting her. The woman's arms were holding onto the back of his torn mesh shirt, and her head was resting on his chest. Naruto smiled softly as her body shook and trembled very slightly. Sasuke kept watching them interact and didn't do anything to stop them. Naruto had this under control. Hopefully, Kaguya wasn't attacking, which was a good sign. But the woman seemed too familiar with Naruto. Sasuke mentally shook his head at the idea. It wasn't his problem. If the woman wasn't attacking, he didn't care what happened. The black-haired teenager sighed quietly before letting go of his weapon. He fell to the ground with one hand supporting his upper body. He looked relieved as he started to slow down his heartbeat. He desperately needed a break. Naruto was only slightly jealous of this woman because she hadn't kicked his behind. Damn idiot. Naruto rubbed Kaguya's back for a while longer before speaking quietly. Do you trust me, Kaguya? The horned goddess's claws tore through the boy's ruined shirt before she nodded. She had to, how could she not? She had connected with him and told him about the most personal parts of her life. What had happened to her made her who she was. He understood her. He knew she wasn't the monster that her loving sons thought she was. He was understanding, empathized, and didn't criticize her for doing what she thought was right. They both wanted the same thing. He wanted to improve the world. That's all Kaguya had ever wanted. And this was exactly why Kaguya couldn't stay. I believe you can make the world a better place, she said softly, holding the boy's mesh shirt. Please turn my dream into a reality. Naruto slowly moved away from Kaguya when he noticed that her emotions were changing. He was speaking with a small frown on his face. It sounds like you're not going to be here to see it, he said. With a sad face, the horned goddess pulled away from the boy's warmth. Her white eyes followed Sasuke for a moment before turning back to Naruto. Because I won't, you'll finish what I started. The 17-year-old wrinkled his eyebrows and shook his head. Why can't you stay? Why would you want to leave? This is your dream, something you've always wanted. You can help me, he asked in a more positive tone at the end. Kaguya shook her head and smiled sadly. This boy, as he was too intelligent, he was way too nice for his own good. He was ignoring all the horrible things she had done. But that was just his personality. He had forgiven the person who killed his mentor and mother figure, forgiven the person who killed his parents. People who spit on him when he was a baby were forgiven. Even forgiving the boy who had almost killed him multiple times and who he now called brother. She had seen all of his life, just as he had seen all of hers, watching him change from a sad and lonely boy into the kind and caring man she now saw. She was a Naruto expert, which made this harder to do. I would love nothing more than to see our dream come true, but I don't deserve it. I need to make up for all the mistakes I've made. She shook her head, then turned away from Naruto and stared at the countless cocoons that held all of humanity. I do not deserve happiness after all I've done. Naruto frowned at the way the woman spoke before responding. Everyone deserves to be happy, and everyone deserves a second chance, said Naruto. Kaguya just shook her head and slowly walked away from him, ignoring his beautiful eyes. Maybe they do, she said, looking out into the vast valley of cocoons with a sad face. But not me. I knew what I did was wrong, and I will make up for it. Please seal me again and fix the problems I've caused. Naruto moved forward and was about to speak when he felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned his head toward the sound and saw that his best friend was looking at him with a small frown. After staring at each other for several long seconds, Naruto sighed quietly. Before slowly turning his eyes back to Kaguya, he looked at her with a touch of sadness in them. Are you sure I can help you? He said quietly. Before shaking her head, Kaguya's chest tightened up tightly. You have to keep me locked up. Naruto was quiet for a moment before he spoke again, and his tone was sad. Sure, if that's what you want, he said weakly as he ended. Sasuke quietly looked at his blonde friend before turning his attention to the woman. It was a unique situation. These two talked as if they had known each other forever. Sasuke would have wondered how that was possible, but on some level he knew that Naruto could connect with people almost instantly. Kaguya was clearly the same, but it felt much closer. Naruto let out a small sigh before looking at Sasuke and nudging his head forward. The blonde teen didn't say anything else, and he and Sasuke slowly moved toward Kaguya's position. The woman kept looking at what she had done and her face showed disappointment. She had let her feelings convince her that what she believed was right. Why? Because she was injured. She shook her head and laughed softly. How could she be so oblivious? She always wanted the world to be better. Slaving people, taking away their chakra, and breaking their will while draining them of their life force was clearly not the answer. Why did she let her power make her arrogant? Why? Throwing a fit because Tenji's supposed betrayal hurt her so much. Was it actually a betrayal? Honestly, now that Tenji was thinking clearly, he had every right to react the way he did. She was a bigger threat to all of humanity than the land of that ever could have been. Look what happened. Humanity was being enslaved again, and the only people who could fight her were two teens who held the power of her beloved son. She deserved whatever the gods had in store for her, and she would gladly accept it. Kaguya felt two hands touch her back, but she didn't react. Instead, she just stared blankly into the vast rock landscape. Aya, Naruto started quietly. Could we talk again someday? Sasuke thought that was an unusual question to ask. His strange eyes moved toward his best friend, and he just stared at the teenager with a calculating look. Kaguya was quiet for a moment before quietly answering. You know about the others, she said, pausing for a moment before turning her head to look at Naruto. Only then can you unseal me. When he heard the answer, Sasuke's eyes narrowed, but before he could say anything, Naruto beat him. We'll be ready, he said with a determined nod and a hand raised to his chest with the thumb pointing inwards. I promise. After a few seconds of not saying anything, Kaguya nodded her head silently. See you later, Naruto. When the woman finally used his name, the teenager swallowed quietly. His eyes narrowed sadly as they trailed southward. Goodbye, Kaguya. Naruto opened his chakra, and Sasuke did the same shortly afterward. As they were talking, the symbols on their hands shone brightly. Rikudo, Chibaku Tensei. Shortly after the teen spoke, the earth started to shake and tremble. As Kaguya's body slowly rose into the sky, Naruto watched with saddened eyes. She got so small that she was just a dot in the sky before a few thousand pieces of earth shot toward her. The huge rocks kept falling on her, trapping her in a prison she couldn't escape. For several long minutes the process continued. Rock after rock after rock was thrown at the woman, making what was definitely the biggest Chibaku Tensei besides the moon. The jutsu ended after 10 minutes of constant shaking. As the huge rock satellite floated calmly in the sky, the earth stopped shaking and the world became quiet. Naruto looked at the huge rock sphere with a small frown on his face. He then sighed quietly and shook his head. Who would have thought this would be the result of the war? He changed the goddess. He has every reason to be happy. But he was, and he wasn't exactly sure why. He was glad that he had stopped her and basically saved the world, but he had a feeling of emptiness. You okay, kid? Naruto was surprised to hear Kurama's voice, since he had been strangely quiet the whole time. He was embarrassed to admit that he had almost forgotten about his new friend. Naruto sighed quietly before speaking to his Biju. Yeah, I'm okay I think. Kurama didn't answer, and he didn't bother to tell the boy that he was obviously lying. Kurama and Naruto were now so in sync that only Biju and Jinchuriki could be closer. He wasn't okay. Naruto took a deep breath and turned toward his best friend, who was staring at him with his eyebrows furrowed. Before speaking, Naruto blinked in response to the look. What? He whispered. After a few moments of silence, Sasuke shook his head and turned toward the rock satellite that was holding Kaguya. Nothing, he quickly answered. Come on, let's release the jutsu, he said with a hand motion, then held up his left hand and waited for Naruto to make the other half of the hand seal. Naruto nodded, then walked over to his best friend and put his right hand on Sasuke's left. The two teens formed the rat hand seal before pulsing their chakra. The huge tree that held the cocoons of humanity writhed for a moment before it started to slowly shrink. The world got brighter, and a huge amount of chakra exploded and started to spread over the whole planet. Slowly but surely, people started leaving their genjutsu paradise. As man, woman, child, and others broke out of their cocoons, the millions of cocoons shrunk. Naruto looked down the valley from his vantage point and saw all of his friends and close family members smiling and cheering. It brought a small smile to his face, but the smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Even though he was happy that he had saved the world and set all of his friends free, he still felt like he was missing something. As he looked at Kaguya's prison, his blue eyes slowly rose to the massive rock structure. As soon as he put both hands in his pockets, his small smile disappeared. Several of his fellow shinobi jumped up to where he and Sasuke were standing, but he didn't notice them and kept looking at the woman's prison. Come, why am I missing you so much? Sasuke communicated with his friends. He never took his eyes off Naruto. His best friend still hadn't noticed his friends and just kept staring at the earth and the sky. Sasuke's face turned into a small frown when he noticed that Naruto wasn't talking to anyone, even though he was surrounded by his friends and fellow shinobi. His smile was fake. His greetings weren't sincere. It did not make sense. The black-haired teen slowly looked at the Chibaku Tensei before turning back to the blonde teen. Maybe it was because so much had happened so quickly. Naruto would be perfect. At least, that's what Sasuke kept telling himself. In the future, he wouldn't realize how wrong he was. Now, 3 years later. Hey, Auntie Tsunade, a soft voice said in an empty clearing. The sound of glass bottles clinking together was heard, followed shortly afterwards by the sound of a cork being unscrewed. I got your favorite. Gamabunta decided not to be cheap this time. Hee. Naruto, who looked much older and wiser, sat down slowly on the grassy ground in front of a large stone grave. A memorial of Tsunade's face was cut into the rock. Several flowers, vases, and other tributes were placed on her grave as Naruto took out 2 glass bottles. He arranged the bottles side by side before pouring Tsunade's favorite sake into the glasses. He did his job quietly and with a kind face. His hair was a couple inches shorter, but it still had the spikes that made him famous. His attire changed slightly as he wore a black jacket with the sleeves cuffed at his forearms. He was wearing burnt orange pants that were tucked into black sandals with open toes. Kakai-sensei says I'll be able to take over the mantle in a couple of years, he said, picking up the glass and gently clinking it against the other glass. I guess it's kind of strange, she said. The 20-year-old man looked at the memorial of his surrogate mother and quietly laughed. He was quiet for a few moments before turning away from her grave and rubbing his neck anxiously with his free hand. I miss you a lot. You were always there for me, he said after he hesitated for a moment. His eyes were a little wet as he continued. It's hard, Auntie Tsunade. Very hard. I'm a jonin now. His smile turned into a grin, which was sad to see because tears were slowly running down his cheeks. Naruto cleared his throat and let out a choking sob. I tried the dating scene didn't lead anywhere. His cerulean orbs fell to the ground as he swirled his cup of sake. She is the only thing I can think about. Naruto did not elaborate nor did he continue, choosing to remain silent. Several minutes passed by as a gentle breeze swept through the clearing. After Naruto collected himself, he sipped on his glass of sake before speaking once more. You know, I never did get to tell you how much I loved you. You were like a mother to me. He trailed off quietly and remained silent for a few minutes. Thank you, Auntie Tsunade. I love you, he said, smiling softly as he drank the rest of his sake. Naruto placed his glass of sake on the ground as his eyes trailed towards the large satellite of rock that was a few hundred miles away from Konoha. It was always there and never touched or bothered anyone. He made sure that happened. He had clones stationed around the large prison day in and day out to make sure that it wasn't tampered or bothered with. This was a painful reminder. He had thought of Kaguya every night that he fell asleep. There wasn't a day that went by where he didn't think about the woman. He had thought it was a phase at first. After all, he connected with a lot of people. Neji, Gaara, Tsunade, Nagato, Abido, Sasuke, but with Kaguya like an obsession. His heart felt empty. It had gotten so bad that he had sought out Kakashi for help. He had questioned his former sensei about the feeling while withholding the information ascertaining to Kaguya herself. Kakashi had first teased him about it by asking if what he was feeling was about a woman. When Naruto had confirmed, Kakashi had gotten quiet. After a few seconds of silence, the man confirmed what Naruto had been avoiding saying. Sounds like you're in love, Naruto. It didn't really surprise Naruto because deep down he had assumed this to be the case, but he had just chosen to ignore it and push it to the back of his mind. In love with Kaguya Otsutsuki, the same woman who had given birth to the Rikudo Sennin and the very same woman that had almost enslaved humanity twice. It was crazy. He had only known Kaguya for about 5 hours, but he was already completely in love with her. Naruto shook his head quietly as he rubbed his face. He had seen her entire life play out and all of the associated emotions that followed. He understood everything about her. How was he not supposed to fall for her? Yes, her actions and the sins she committed were atrocious, but she had changed. Was it weird? Probably. In love with a goddess. Kami, what would his mom think? Actually, she'd probably be happy that he finally found someone and would possibly jump for joy that he loved the strongest woman in the elemental nations. Shaking his head of those thoughts, Naruto slowly rose to his feet while placing his hands in his pockets. He slowly leaned his body over before placing a gentle kiss on the stone memorial of Tsunade, right on her forehead. Naruto returned to his full height before sensing someone behind him. Before he saw a man with pale skin, his eyebrows furrowed in confusion. A pale-skinned man that shared a heavy resemblance to the Otsutsuki's. His eyes got a lot smaller as he started drawing in nature chakra. If this Otsutsuki wanted a fight, then Naruto would give him one. Naruto asked quietly, "What's your name?" as his students changed into their usual toad shapes. The pale-skinned man was quiet for a few minutes before a small smile appeared on his face. His eyes did not open and Naruto suspected that he lacked actual pupils. "My name is Tomri Otsutsuki. I wanted to meet the hero of the 4th Shinobi. I war for myself. You do not disappoint," he replied in a calm manner. Tomri Otsutsuki. That wasn't one of the names that he learned from Kaguya's memories. Naruto directed the entirety of his chakra on the man and would have scoffed if he was Sasuke. If this guy was cringing just from the weight of his base chakra, he wasn't even close to his level. He'd crush him without having to even access Kurama's power. With that being the case, why was he here? Any particular reason you're here, Tomri Otsutsuki? Naruto questioned with a raised eyebrow. You wouldn't be able to touch me, in case you were wondering. I suggest you return to where you came from. My best friend isn't as understanding. Tomri's eyebrows furrowed in confusion at the statement before feeling the cold steel of a blade on his throat. His body tensed up as his head slowly turned to face behind him. The newcomer asked in a harsh voice, "What's an Otsutsuki doing here?" His mismatched orbs gazing directly at Tomri with a blank expression. A violet Rinnegan that had several Tomo in his left orb and a Magnikyo Sharingan in the right. "Beats me, Sasuke," Naruto answered lazily. He didn't attack me, so he trailed off while gesturing with his hand for the pale-skinned man to speak. Sasuke moved the blade closer to Tomri's throat before speaking, so Tomri couldn't say anything. "It doesn't mean he won't cause trouble. He isn't a match for the both of us." The blonde Jinchuriki shrugged his shoulders and turned away from his best friend before walking away. Let me know what you find. I'm going to visit her. Naruto waved behind his back before disappearing in a yellow flash, leaving his best friend with the unknown Otsutsuki. Naruto appeared in a yellow flash directly atop Kaguya's prison. He glanced around his surroundings before shrugging his shoulders and sitting down on the large formation of rock. And he just sat and sat and sat for hours and hours. When he wasn't doing missions or training to get even stronger, he was here, sitting atop Kaguya's prison, waiting. Wherefore? He wasn't completely sure. Well, that was a lie. He knew exactly why. If the Otsutsuki chasing Kaguya found this planet, Naruto wanted to be ready to let her go at any time. These beings were very powerful, but Sasuke and he were not Otsutsuki. It's not that they didn't train and get stronger, but it was never as strong as the natural power of the Otsutsuki bloodline. Naruto was far more powerful now than when he was 17, exponentially so. But that didn't mean he should get complacent. That Momoshiki guy scared Kaguya. Granted, that had been before she ate the Shinju fruit, but still, never hurts to prepare just in case. All three of those Otsutsuki could potentially attack at the same time. While it was a harrowing thought, he was confident that with Sasuke and Kaguya at his side that they'd be fine. "How are you, Kaguya?" Naruto asked quietly. He was silent for several minutes before speaking once again. "I went to see Auntie Tsunade today and shared some sake with her," he said as he sighed heavily and crossed his hands behind his head on a rock. "I still don't like the taste. I don't understand how people can drink it. It tastes horrible." Naruto was silent for another few minutes before closing his eyes with a smile. "My birthday is coming up, and I'm just not feeling it. The guys want to take me out drinking, but I'm not a drinker. I don't like the way alcohol tastes, but whatever. They want to go out, and I feel like I have to go because I'm rarely in the village these days with all the training, missions, and peace talks between the nations." Naruto kept talking to Kaguya for hours without her saying anything. As the moon was just starting to rise, the sun started to slowly go down. Naruto slowly peeked an eye open and noticed Sasuke standing several feet away from him, staring at the setting sun. Sasuke wore a piece of black fabric that wrapped around his head and held his hair in place. One of his bangs fell down, covering his Rinnegan and hiding it. He wore a dirty, sandy poncho over his main attire and wore dark gray pants with blank open-toed sandals. His kusanagi was hidden underneath the poncho and rested in the man's right hand. "So what did you learn?" Naruto asked with a raised eyebrow. Sasuke was quiet for a moment, then he shook his head slightly in annoyance. "He's obsessed with Hinata," Sasuke said, looking at Naruto to see how he would react. "Exactly as expected, nothing. Platonic at best." "Oh," the blonde replied with feigning interest. Before he spoke again in the same boring tone, his eyes slowly closed. "What you do to him?" Only the sound of liquid dripping was heard between the two brothers. Naruto made a low humming noise as he responded in a chastising tone. "Sakura's going to be mad you're spilling blood again." Sasuke didn't bother responding to the boy's statement. Tonri would have been a problem, and problems like that needed to be dealt with swiftly. "Did he suffer?" Naruto asked curiously while peeking an eye open curiously. The last Uchiha glanced at his best friend before responding in a placid tone. "That would require me to care enough about it to do it. Could have just said no, you bastard." Naruto jibbed back amusingly. Sasuke answered with a small grin and changed the subject. "Still here, hum?" The blonde Jinchuriki sighed quietly before answering. "Just ask what you wanna ask. I know you love her, don't you?" There was silence for several minutes. "Yes, I do," Naruto responded quietly. "Why are you asking?" The last Uchiha was quiet for just a few seconds before nodding his head and walking away without saying a word. Naruto's face wrinkled up in irritation before he rolled his eyes. "Stupid bastard." 12 years later, Sarada Uchiha vs Shikadai Nara. Naruto slowly opened his eyes, giving the impression that he was a lot older than he really was, and then he looked down at the big arena below him. He was resting his cheek on his closed fist and not really paying attention to the Chunin exams. Despite how bad that sounded, he took his job as the 7th Hokage serious, but sometimes you just get lazy. "Nay, Hokage dono," said the 4th Tsuchikage Kiritsuchi, laughing. "Bored already, eh?" Naruto slowly looked at the 4 Kages who were staring at him with their eyebrows raised. He answered with a small smirk, ignoring their amused looks. "A little bit, yes, but can you really blame me?" Naruto rubbed his eyes, shook his head, and then turned his attention to the fight that was happening. The other Kage was chatting with another Kage and praising the intelligence and creativity of the 2 Konoha genin. Naruto looked at Sarada with an appraising look as he watched her move. She moved like Sasuke did when they were the same age, but fought with the fierceness and passion of her mother. She was definitely Sasuke and Sakura's child. Shikadai was more or less Shikamaru with a hint of Temari. He was much more motivated, which was good. Unlike Shikamaru, Shikadai was willing to go out and actively train without the ever-looming threat of Temari's battle fan. Naruto kept watching the two genins fight until he felt a prickle at the back of his neck. His eyebrows furrowed for a moment as he looked at Sasuke, who was sitting on one of the stadium's roofs. The two men looked into each other's eyes for 1 second before flaring their chakra. Not a moment later did the stadium become covered in Sasuke and Naruto's chakra. Everyone in the village stopped what they were doing as the two strongest men of the elemental nations forced their will on the world. Dark purple chakra exploded in the sky and joined with the bright orange chakra that covered the whole village. When another powerful presence appeared and fought with Naruto and Sasuke's chakra, the world seemed to shake from the pressure of Sasuke and Naruto's chakra. Well, look what we have here. Naruto's unique pupils slowly traveled into the sky, spotting a particularly short, pale-skinned man. He sported two antelope-like horns atop his crown and his power was relatively impressive. Naruto appeared next to Sarada and Shikadai, his hands on their shoulders. A moment later, Sasuke appeared next to his brother. He, too, was looking up at the small Otsutsuki. Tsubai Jinchuriki. The short man spoke aloud with a sick smile. I'm going to take that chakra and put it inside you. Naruto stared at the man for a brief moment before another Otsutsuki appeared beside the shorter one. This man was much bigger than his ally and had a fair amount of power. Not enough to challenge him or Sasuke, only the short Otsutsuki member could be a threat. You're that strong. All things considered, Naruto said calmly. He noticed right away that the shorter man looked annoyed. You can't even be compared to Kaguya. Everyone noticed the man's new attitude. He went from looking annoyed to angry almost immediately. His chakra exploded outwards and an amused expression formed on Naruto's face. This man wasn't really all that strong. Naruto could take him by himself. Naruto became shrouded in the energy of Kurama. His Haori jacket extended to the back of his knees and flickered at the tip like ethereal flames. Naruto flared his chakra once more and his orange chakra cloak shined brightly. 7 Gyudadama appeared behind him, and his crown had 2 small horns sticking out. His body was covered with black Magatama markings in a unique way. Naruto made fun of Momoshiki by saying, I'd say you're Momoshiki based on how you reacted to Kaguya's name. I've got a score to settle with you, midget. Momoshiki clenched his teeth in pure anger at Naruto's comment. You dare mock me, you little monkey. I quote El show yo. The diminutive man was cut off from speaking as Naruto appeared directly in front of the man with his hand wrapped around the man's face. A nanosecond passed by before Naruto and Momoshiki disappeared in a yellow flash. Naruto thought that Sasuke could easily deal with Otsutsuki, who was overweight. He wanted to crush Momoshiki beneath his boot. The two strong men appeared in the air hundreds of miles from Konoha. Naruto reared his arm back before launching Momoshiki into the earth. The short man hit the ground almost instantly, and a mountain of earth exploded as a result of what happened. Naruto remained floating in the air with his hands in his pockets. He had a blank look on his face as he looked down at the ruined earth, and then turned his head slightly to the right. Behind him, the huge, ominous-looking prison of Kaguya was looming. A small smirk formed on Naruto's face as he spoke to the satellite of Earth. Can you sense him, Kaguya-chan? He felt the lightest pulse of chakra from within the sphere, and a genuine smile formed on his face. Do you want to be released? He asked rhetorically, already knowing the answer. Another pulse, and this one is a lot stronger than the last one. So much that the prison almost seemed to shake and tremble. A Gyudadama turned into a staff and floated toward Naruto's hand. The blonde man twirled the black staff before resting it on his shoulder. I'll let you go soon, Kaguya-chan. I want to break him, he said, and his eyes turned red for a moment before going back to their usual bright orange color. A beam of pure red chakra zipped out of the dust below Naruto, heading straight towards his head. Naruto glanced towards the beam before raising his hand and casually slapping the beam of energy away from his body and away from Kaguya's prison. The beam of energy struck the ground almost a second later, and a ginormous explosion rocked the earth. The powerful attack made the ground shake and move for several seconds. Naruto lazily scratched his chin before pointing his staff towards Momoshiki's position. You're not very strong. If you don't get stronger, I'll just be wasting my time. The shorter Otsutsuki member appeared directly in Naruto's with a red orb of chakra that rivaled one of Naruto's Udama Rasengan. I quote LL crush you. Short Otsutsuki screamed loudly. Naruto scoffed quietly before disappearing in a yellow flash, causing Momoshiki's eyes to actually widen. When Naruto's golden-covered boot hit Momoshiki's jaw, it hurt like hell. Blood spewed out from his mouth, and due to the lapse of concentration, his orb of chakra destabilized. Before the orb could implode, pain erupted from the top of Momoshiki's head. Naruto's fist landed right on the top of the man's head, sending him flying back into the hole Naruto had put him in during their first fight. Momoshiki's body impacted into the earth, and before he could react, Naruto appeared direct above him with a lava-infused racing and spiraling in his left hand. Momoshiki's eyes widened and pain filled his body as the superheated Rasengan slammed into his abdomen. The lava-infused Rasengan grinded and seared his flesh before Naruto forced the jutsu to explode. A tremendous geyser of lava erupted into the heavens, followed shortly afterwards by a large shockwave. A scream of pain followed shortly after the large explosion of lava. Naruto stood over Momoshiki, who had several Gyutadama stabbed through his appendages. Naruto was a little surprised to see that the man wasn't affected by the Gyutadama's ability to atomize whatever it touches. Interesting, not like it mattered. He would probably die soon. Naruto twirled one of his remaining Gyutadama before placing it directly on Momoshiki's forehead. I really should just kill you now, but I promised Kaguya-chan I'd let her finish you off. Is there anything you want to say to me before I kill you? The short Otsutsuki grinned through bloody teeth before spitting a flob of substance at Naruto's face. Fuck you, mongrel. Naruto wiped the crimson liquid off of his face with a lazy swipe before slowly shaking his head. He raised his golden-clad sandal before stomping directly onto the man's lower jaw. Naruto sighed quietly before looking to his right and seeing Sasuke carrying the fat Otsutsuki on his shoulder. Naruto couldn't feel the man's life force, so he assumed he had killed him. That didn't take long, Naruto said quietly, raising his brow. Sasuke didn't answer and just kept staring down at the small Otsutsuki member. He isn't dead. Sasuke's placid statement caused a small smirk to form on Naruto's face. No, he is not, she said. Sasuke did not fall for the bait as he dropped the large Otsutsuki member on the ground. Why? He asked simply. Naruto's response was to hold up his right hand, signaling for Sasuke to finish the unfinished hand seal that he was making. Before Sasuke turned his head toward Kaguya's prison, there was a short period of silence in the clearing. His mismatched orbs stared at the satellite of rock before he sighed quietly. It's been 15 years, Naruto. The blonde man ignored the statement and just continued to hold his right hand out. I don't know why I even bother. The ebony-haired man shook his head in annoyance before placing his left hand against Naruto's right hand, finishing the seal required for releasing Kaguya. The two men flared their chakra for a moment, and shortly after the world began to shake. The giant satellite of rock began to slowly break apart, sending mountain-sized boulders down towards the earth. Several minutes passed by as both men stared at the construct of chakra that was slowly withering away. Naruto stood still with bated breath as he felt the presence of Kaguya wash over the elemental nations. Her chakra wrapped itself around him, cocooning and entangling him. His heartbeat began to quicken as the final pieces of rubble began to slowly fall away from Kaguya. His entire focus was centered on the beautiful woman who was floating motionlessly in the air. Several seconds went by in silence before the woman's eyes slowly opened. Her chakra flared for a brief moment before her head tilted downward. Her snowy white eyes focused on Momoshiki's form for all but a second before instantly shifting towards Naruto and staring directly into his unique eyes. The two powerful individuals continued their little stare-off for a full minute before Kaguya abruptly moved, and this time, Naruto was able to follow her without trouble. She appeared directly in front of him before slowly craning her head to stare into his eyes. He had gotten immensely taller these last few years. Where he once stood an inch or two above her, he now stood almost 2 heads taller than her, towering over her. His chakra. His chakra. It hadn't changed at all. Comforting, warm, kind. The goddess took a step closer to the man as her head tilted curiously. You have changed a lot. Naruto stared into her beautiful white orbs for a moment before offering her a gentle smile. You have not still as beautiful as I remember. Kaguya blinked at the compliment, not truly knowing how to reply. She enjoyed it immensely despite not physically showing a reaction to it. The man was aware of her emotions anyway, so it didn't matter if she reacted to begin with. I heard you, she started softly. Every day that you visited asking me mundane questions or just talking to fill the silence. Your visits, I appreciated them. Naruto's cheeks pulled back as he grinned softly with a gentle look in his eyes. I thought about you every single day. I don't think there was a day that went by where I didn't. Kaguya's head inclined slightly at the statement. You expressed this sentiment many a times during your frequent visits. A small dash of red actually painted the whiskered man's cheeks that was thankfully hidden by his Kurama cloak. Naruto chuckled nervously while rubbing the back of his head. Why yahoo? He coughed awkwardly as his eyes strayed towards Sasuke, who sported an amused smirk. Anyway, I have a gift. He slowly flourished with his left hand and came to stand by Kaguya's side. He placed his left hand on her lower back as he gestured towards the disabled Otsutsuki laying on the ground. pinned by Naruto's Gudadamas. I assume that this little cretin is Momoshiki, no? He asked rhetorically. Kaguya did not verbally respond as her gaze shifted to the Tint Otsutsuki member currently splayed out on the ground. Her eyes narrowed significantly as she continued to stare the man who had hunted her since she was but a babe. She used to be terrified of this little vermin, scared that he would devour her, scared that he would kill her just like her beloved little sister. But now that she was getting a good look at him and sensing the power he held, he was weak, frail, pathetic. Kaguya slowly raised her hand with her index finger extended towards the tiny man. Her Byakugan activated as she glared at Momoshiki with hate. "I will see you in hell, cousin," she whispered venomously. A bone shard proceeded to fly out the tip of her finger before impaling the man directly in his forehead. His eyes widened exponentially before his body started to turn to ash. It only took 5 seconds for the man to be completely erased from existence. An impressive and slightly terrifying feat. Naruto stared at the remains of Momoshiki before glancing towards Sasuke and raising an eyebrow. "And you say you survived against that?" Sasuke just rolled his eyes before glancing towards the other deceased Otsutsuki that was laying on the ground. Black flames immediately covered the man's body as Sasuke turned towards Naruto. The two brothers shared a silent conversation before Sasuke disappeared in a burst of speed, leaving the two alone. Naruto was silent for a few moments before turning towards the pale-skinned goddess and blinking at the look that she was currently giving him. Her white orbs peered directly at him and he met her gaze with little trouble. His cerulean orbs traveled along her unique and delicate features for several moments before he took a step closer. Kaguya showed no objection to the movement and continued to remain silent, staring into his eyes. The blonde man took another step closer to the woman who still did not object to his advance. Naruto licked his lips for a moment before closing the distance between them in a single stride. Kaguya's head craned upwards as the blonde man stood but a single inch away from her. Her pale orbs roamed across his face, studying every inch that could see and memorizing every little detail. Chiseled chin, thin eyebrows, sharp eyes. An attractive man he was. Naruto started quietly, his usual confident and bold personality evading him. "Yueu, damn, this is hard." He released a shaky sigh before shaking his head. He was about to start again before being stopped as Kaguya's finger found purchase atop his lips. The blonde man stared at the woman with furrowed eyebrows. "You need not say it. I am already aware." Naruto, her tone was soft and gentle as her finger lightly trailed away from his mouth and onto his chiseled chin. Her dainty fingers gently grasped his chin and he slowly leaned into the touch. "I am not sure if I can say the same, but she faltered for a moment before ultimately sighing and placing her hand on the back of his head. She ran her fingers through his spiky hair as she stared into his eyes. "I am willing to try," she finished softly. Naruto's arms slowly encircled the woman who showed no signs of resisting, his larger stature towering over her and dwarfing her. His fingers idly swept through her long tresses of snowy white hair as he inhaled her scent. He inhaled heavily before exhaling quietly and staring into the woman's beautiful orbs. His eyes widened in surprise as the woman pulled his face towards his own. Their lips met a second later as Naruto stood completely still, not truly expecting the woman to do what she did. After a short awkward moment, his eyes slowly closed and his tense shoulders uncoiled slowly. His lips intertwined with the shorter woman's own and he succumbed to the touch of the goddess. Delicate, soft, before he realized that he was pulling the woman flesh against his body. The goddess did not resist his action and seemed almost pleased to an extent. Her claw-like nails raked through his hair, sending chills down his spine. Kaguya released a tiny moan as she slipped her tongue into Naruto's mouth. Her body shook with pleasure as the taller man reciprocated her action. A heavy blush formed on the woman's face as she released another tiny mewl of pleasure. This was getting a bit overwhelming. Kaguya pulled away with a breathy exhale as her chest rose and fell heavily. Her cheeks were dusted red as she stared into the man's cerulean orbs. She enjoyed that very much. Naruto released a heavy exhale as he stared into the woman's eyes. He had wanted to do this for the last 15 years. He wasn't embarrassed to admit that he had even dreamt of this happening, but this was better than of those dreams. He might be addicted. Addicted to the touch of a goddess. "What's this? You people call this tasty treat ice cream?" Naruto's blue eyes were fixed on the goddess with pale skin who was sitting in front of him. As the woman poked the frozen treat with curious but suspicious eyes, a small smile appeared on his face. "Yes, Kaguya-chan," he said as he slowly put his own bowl of ice cream on the table and pointed to the woman. "Here, let me." As the blonde man picked up her bowl, Kaguya slowly blinked. She looked at the man with narrowed eyes as he took a scoop of the frozen treat and held it out to her. "Silence. What exactly are you doing?" Kaguya couldn't figure out why she felt so embarrassed. I'm feeding you, he said simply, moving his hand around a bit. Please open your mouth, he asked with a small smile. The woman didn't move for a long time as her blank eyes looked straight at Naruto. I'm not a kid, she said. Naruto shook his head slowly while still holding out the spoon to her. He asked with a tilt of the head, of course not. But I want to feed you. Will you let me? Kaguya's eyes left her lover. She looked around the restaurant where she and Naruto were eating, noticing how many people were watching their little conversation. It wasn't pleasant. Come on, Haim, Naruto said in a soft voice. Don't worry about them. Pay attention to me. Look at me. Before she slowly and hesitantly opened her mouth, her pale eyes moved back and forth between his face and the tasty thing on the spoon. She saw the man's eyes get crinkly because of the soft smile on his handsome face. As the spoon moved closer to her orifice, she slowly felt heat spread across her face. Naruto put the spoon slowly in Kaguya's mouth and grinned when he saw how embarrassed she looked. After a few seconds, he slowly took the spoon away from her mouth. It was very clean. That Kaguya looked less embarrassed as she looked at her bowl of ice cream. Give me more, she said. Naruto covered his laugh with a small cough, then put more of the frozen treat on the spoon and fed it to Kaguya. The pale goddess ate spoonful after spoonful after spoonful, and showed no sign of stopping. The silence between the two lovers was broken by the sound of the spoon hitting the glass bowl. Both Naruto and Kaguya looked at the empty bowl at the same time. A moment of silence passed before Kaguya grabbed Naruto's hand and led it to his own bowl. She then pushed down on his hand to tell him to get his own ice cream and give it to her, which he did after he laughed for a moment. With a smile on his face, Naruto kept feeding the mother of chakra. It didn't bother him too much. Even though ice cream wasn't his favorite sweet treat, he didn't mind it. But it seemed like Kaguya liked it best. She was almost forcing him to force feed it to her. The woman cleaned his bowl in a lot less time than it took her to clean her own. And then she looked at him with a small frown on her face. May I have more? Well, how could he turn her down? She was making puppy dog eyes at him. So, Naruto kept putting ice cream in front of the goddess. They tried every flavor in the shop, and Naruto wrote down that her favorite was chocolate pecan. To be honest, he would have thought she liked plain things. Kaguya leaned against the mahogany chair she was sitting in with a happy smile on her face. There were about a dozen empty bowls neatly stacked in front of her. Kaguya looked at the nervous waitress who was picking up the empty bowls in front of her. She could tell that the woman was scared and worried about being so close. It was disheartening. The waitress bowed very low and said, I hope you enjoyed the treats. The glass bowls on the metal tray clanked loudly against each other. Kaguya could almost taste how scared the young woman was. Basically, you could feel it. Before the horned goddess could answer, the waitress quickly hid behind the holy kitchen to clean up the dirty dishes. Kaguya watched the woman's body disappear behind the double doors that led into the kitchen until he could no longer see her. She had nothing on her face but her eyes. Disappointment, sadness, regret. Hey, as he talked, she felt the warm, gentle touch of her lover's hand on her own hands. Give it time, he told her in a soft voice. She didn't answer to what he said. Instead, she looked at his hands that were gently touching hers. She really wanted to trust him, but a little over a month ago, Naruto told everyone who she was. It was brave of her to do that since she was the one who started the Fourth Shinobi War. It had been a very difficult time, not only for her, but also for Naruto. Many people in the elemental nations really thought he was crazy for making that choice, and she didn't blame them. When Sasuke stepped in, that stopped right away. Even though the man was often cold and rude, he was Naruto's brother in all but blood. He had made sure to tell the elemental nation about all of Naruto's good deeds and the things he had done for no reason other than to help make peace in the future. Only Naruto's close friends and family had accepted his have a connection with her. The rest were smart enough to keep their thoughts to themselves. Two of the three strongest beings in the elemental nations getting angry would be bad for the world. Politics had caused her lover the most trouble, and she had apologized many times for it. The morality of what she did, the fact that she was there, their relationship, etc. Naruto kept a smile on his face through every one of the hard conversations, just telling her that she was worth the work and trouble. It meant a lot to her, but at the same time she was completely to blame for them. Do you have horns on your head? Kaguya's thoughts were interrupted when she slowly looked to her left. She saw a girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old looking at her with wide eyes. She had navy blue hair and white eyes, which suggested that the little girl was of Hyuga descent. She had 2 red marks on her cheeks that looked like triangles, and her teeth were very sharp. The little Inuzuka, Hyuga wore a black skirt and a fluffy jacket with wolf's fur lining the hood. When the little girl yelled, the whole place went completely still and quiet. As Kaguya stared at the little girl, Her blank eyes were drawn to her. Kaguya didn't answer for several long seconds. "Yes, these are horns," was her simple answer. The little girl jumped up and down as she got closer to the table where Kaguya and Naruto were sitting. She jumped up and down with her hands on the table. "Are they real?" she asked with a smile that was too big. Kaguya replied again in the same boring way. "Yes." The girl, who was already very active, seemed to get even more animated. She put her hand up to Kaguya's head, even though she was too short to even reach the woman's shoulders. Kaguya's raised eyebrows and tilted head showed that the question and action surprised her. She blinked several times as the little girl desperately tried to grab Kaguya's horns. "Himawari-chan." When the man called her name, the little girl stopped what she was doing and looked in his direction. She yelled, "Uncle Naru," with joy as she ran toward him and jumped at him. Himawari, a fast-moving rocket, was caught by the Nanadame Hokage, who laughed softly. When she sat down on his lap, he asked, "Where are your parents?" Himawari smiled from where she was and looked at Kaguya as she spoke. She pouted after saying, "Mommy was too slow. I wanted ice cream, but she was being a slowpoke." As he spoke, Naruto patted the girl on the head. "I get it, but you can't run off like that. If you keep doing it, you'll scare your mother. Do you like making her worry?" The little girl's mood changed right away when she answered in a quiet voice, "No." Naruto gave her a nod and ruffled her hair. He asked in a slightly scolding tone, "Then why do you run away?" Himawari's head dropped, and she gave a quiet answer with a small frown on her face. "I know no." Naruto sighed as if he was upset before answering. "I guess I'll have to tell your mother, Himawari." He had a sneaky grin on his face as the girl turned around with a shocked look, even though her mother would have known she had run away. They were so easy to fool. "Don't do that. I'll get in trouble, and then my mom won't let me get ice cream anymore." Naruto gave his lover a quick glance, then put his index finger on his chin and hummed loudly. I'm not sure." He tapped his chin a few times before going on. "Kaguya-chan might be able to help you if you ask her nicely." Kaguya slowly blinked as the little girl turned her sharp eyes on her. She then did an adorable thing by putting her hands together and bowing her head. "Princess, please, 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 please help me. I want ice cream." The horn goddess was quiet for just a second before she looked at her lover. When he talked to her, he always had the same gentle smile on his face. When Himawari spoke, Kaguya turned away from her and gave a light blush. "It would make me happy." Himawari cheered loudly from where she was sitting, and then she jumped off Naruto's lap and ran towards Kaguya. A voice came from the front of the store before she could reach the woman. "What did I say about running, Himawari-chan? You scared me to death." 3 sets of eyes turned right away to look at the person who had spoken. Slowly, a woman with the distinctive features of a Hyuga started to make her way toward them. Her navy blue hair reached her lower back, and the casual sweater she wore didn't do much to hide her shape. The horn goddess took a quick look at her closet, and a small frown formed on her face. Did her kimono boring? Perhaps maybe a change would be good for her. "I'm so sorry," said the brunette, who was a little bit embarrassed. "Himawari is crazy about ice cream." Naruto gave her a small smile and a wave as she said she was sorry. "It's okay, Hinata. She reminds me of myself when I was her age," he said with a low laugh as he glanced at Kaguya, who was looking at Hinata's clothes in a sneaky way. Naruto didn't say anything about how interested his lover was, he just smiled. He asked with a small wave of his hand, "How are you in Kiba?" Hinata, whose name was now Himawari, smiled a little as Himawari grabbed her hand and moved her arms back and forth. "We've been doing well," she said. For a moment, she looked at Kaguya, but then she looked back at Naruto's blue eyes. "Are Kaguya and you doing well? I hope there aren't any problems," she asked with a worried frown. Kaguya noticed that the woman asked the question in a sincere way, which also didn't really shock her. When they were younger, this woman was head over heels in love with Naruto. After a short time with a woman and a short time on the dating scene, he decided that it wasn't for him. They were together for a few months before they broke up and decided to stay friends. "You know, the usual backhanded compliments and snide remarks here and there," Naruto said to his lover, who was now looking at the table with a narrowed gaze. "Except for that, everything is fine." Hinata gave the quiet goddess a quick glance and a small frown before she spoke. "Are you well, Kaguya-sama?" When she heard her name, the pale woman blinked slowly and then turned her head to look at Hinata. Before Kaguya spoke in a quiet voice, she looked into a pair of eyes that were also pale white. "As good as I can be, given everything that's happened." Hinata kept her small frown as she spoke. "I'd be happy to listen to you if you ever need to talk to someone." The woman's help was appreciated, but in the end, it wasn't necessary. "You don't have to go out of your way for me," he said quietly. "Thank you, though." Before Hinata could say anything, a group of NBU appeared around Naruto, who didn't seem bothered by their sudden arrival. "Hokage-sama," the bird masked member spoke aloud. He told them, they are here. Naruto was quiet for a moment before he let out a quiet sigh and slowly stood up. They weren't supposed to come for another week, but he shook his head to stop that train of thought, then looked at Kaguya and held out his hand for the woman. Time, duty calls. Kaguya took his hand in silence as she slowly stood up and moved closer to the blonde man. Slowly, the hand she was holding moved away from where it was and landed on her lower back. He asked her quietly, "Do you want me to walk you home?" He didn't care that people were probably staring at them. Kaguya's eyes slowly closed as she gave in to her lover's gentle touch. She put her head on his strong chest, making sure her horns didn't touch his neck. "I'll be fine, my love," she said quietly, a bit embarrassed because she wasn't used to public displays of affection. She didn't care or anything. As he ran his hand through her long, snowy hair, Naruto didn't say anything. He gave her a soft kiss on the top of her head because he knew how she felt about showing affection in public. He gave her a tight squeeze and tried to pull away, but was surprised when she pulled him back. When he turned his head to look at her from below, she gave him a clean kiss on the lips. It was short and a little weird, but Naruto didn't really care about the details. He was just surprised that the woman had started it. His blue eyes looked down into Kaguya's pale eyes with a small smile on his face. After a few seconds, however, the woman turned away with a red face. "I'll get home as quickly as I can, Haim." Kaguya pushed down her worry and answered quietly, "I'll be waiting for you as well." Naruto smiled softly one last time before he and the other ANBU members in the area disappeared in a yellow flash. The goddess with the horn stood still for a few minutes as her arms slowly fell to her sides. She thought naked. She felt like the whole world was on her shoulders and was going to crush her. As her chest tightened, her pale eyes slowly fell to the bright tiles of the place. As she stood there like a statue, her worry was making her feel like she was going to break. Hoping, she prayed that, now that Naruto was gone, she wouldn't be the center of attention. But she wouldn't look. She refused to look up and see the looks of anger, fear, and hate. Kaguya's fingers, which were shaped like claws, moved nervously as she squeezed her eyes shut. She did everything she could to get rid of the thoughts that kept coming back and were about to drown her. But she couldn't, though. She ran away like the coward she was. As she fell through it, a warped portal appeared right below her. She disappeared and ran away from the people looking down on her. "You have been here for a long time." Kaguya slowly opened her eyes, but she didn't move. Her snowy eyes were focused on the gravestone right in front of her, but she didn't say anything. She replied, "And you've been watching me for just as long." Sasuke stood a few feet away from the woman and looked at her kneeling body. He didn't say anything for a moment before quietly answering, "A safe place." He looked for in silence. Kaguya was quiet for a while as she looked at the gravestone of Tsunade Senju. When she finally spoke, it was in a low voice. "Did he tell you to keep an eye on me?" The Uchiha answered quietly as he moved toward them. "Call it a favor. You don't seem like the kind of man who does things out of the goodness of his heart," Kaguya said, though she didn't mean to be condescending. Sasuke knew what the goddess meant, so he stopped right next to her. "You'd be right," was his simple reply. "And why are you here?" she asked with the same ease. Sasuke was quiet for a few minutes as he, too, looked at the grave Naruto had dug for Tsunade. He finally said, "You are too hard on yourself." No matter what Kaguya thought the Uchiha would say, it was not that. She closed her eyes for a moment before finally taking her eyes off the grave. Before she spoke, her pale eyes looked at Sasuke's mismatched eyes for a moment. "I am the only one to blame for all the suffering in this world. My selfish desires killed the innocent, the good, and the bad." Her eyes hardened as she stared into Sasuke's Rinnegan. "Whatever advice you have for me, keep it to yourself. I will always have this burden and knowledge. I do not deserve this second chance. I do not deserve happiness." Her voice went up an octave as her chakra began to leak out in anger. "I deserve nothing." Everything in the immediate area, except for Sasuke and Tsunade's grave, turned to dust and ash at once. Her anger had literally torn the world apart. Sasuke was not scared or worried at all by the woman's outburst. He just kept his cool. "But Naruto thinks otherwise," he said plainly. Before Kaguya could say anything, a warm, calming aura filled the area, and then there was a bright, golden flash. Naruto showed up next to his lover, who was wrapped in the Biju's chakra cloak. Before he turned back to his lover, he gave Sasuke a quick look with his unique eyes. He knelt down next to Kaguya and spoke softly while putting out his hand. "Haim, come." It was a simple move, and then he said something even simpler. But those small things, they were very important to Kaguya. She didn't say anything as she grabbed the man's hand, but her anger wouldn't go away. Her mind became clear, and she felt like she was floating on clouds. She started to feel like she didn't have any weight, and she let that feeling wash over her. Kaguya was no longer kneeling in front of Tsunade's grave when she opened her eyes. Instead, she was in Naruto's mind, where she met his Biju face to face. The huge fox was lying down with its head on its hands, which looked like human hands. It was slow to breathe, which was a sign that the beast was sleeping. The goddess stopped looking at the fox and turned to look at her lover with an expectant look. She didn't have to ask, because he probably already knew the answer. Privacy, he said with confidence. In his mindscape, the blonde man sat on the surface of the water. He looked into her eyes and patted the water in front of him. Sit, Haim. The goddess, who had pale skin, looked at the man for a second before giving in. She folded her hands neatly in her lap and focused on Naruto's voice. A small smile appeared on Naruto's face because of something that happened. She was really beautiful. He began softly, talk to me, Kaguya-chan. What's the matter? The woman looked into her lover's blue eyes with a small frown on her face. What happened? Naruto knew something wasn't right. If you don't talk to me, Haim, I can't help you. As she looked at the watery floor of the man's shared mindscape, her frustration grew. As she tried to talk, her nails, which looked like claws, raked against her ceremonial kimono. After being quiet for a few minutes, Kaguya finally spoke. Why? She spoke in a small, uncertain voice as she went on. Why have you gone so far for me? Why do you keep doing it? Beautiful tears started to fall down her face as she spoke. I don't deserve any of this. I've accepted that I'll never be accepted in this world. Kaguya closed her eyes tightly and bowed her head low. My hands are dirty. I'm a monster. This regret. This pain. As Kaguya spoke again, her claws tore through her clothes and drew blood on her thighs. I never wanted this, and I can't do it anymore. After she let out her feelings, there was dead silence, but she didn't care. She couldn't stop the tears from running down her face like water from a faucet. If I could take it back, I would. I wouldn't have eaten that cursed fruit. Her sadness started to come back as she tried to keep her feelings in check. My race only knows destruction. I was a fool to ever think I could be human, to think I could be different. Kaguya, you are not a monster. As soon as Naruto said those words, Kaguya's snow-white eyes shot toward him. She wanted to say that wasn't true, to yell at him that he was wrong. She couldn't, though, because she wanted to believe it in her heart, was hoping that she was different, wanted to think she was more human-like. Naruto's hand moved slowly up from his lap and landed on Kaguya's cheek. He gently touched her cheek with his thumb and then slowly wiped her tears away. Naruto's eyes softened as he put his other hand on top of Kaguya's clasped hands and said, I can feel the regret you feel every day. I know it eats at you every night and keeps you awake. But you're not a monster. Would a monster really feel bad about what they did? After that question, the goddess turned away and looked at the ground with sadness. They wouldn't, of course, but she still did the things, and that couldn't be changed. Hey, he said softly, drawing the woman's attention back to him slowly. Time heals all wounds, Kaguya. There are many things you can do to make up for what you did. But just know that you're not alone. I'll always be here, and I'll stand by your side to help you find your inner peace, even if it kills me. Again, Kaguya's eyes filled with tears as she looked into Naruto's. How much love and affection he showed. The pale-skinned woman ran straight at the man and landed on his stomach, knocking him to the ground. She only said, I don't deserve you, as her lips touched his. Naruto took a quick look at his friends and noticed their wide eyes and scared looks. He thought it was clear why they did it. Kaguya was not someone that the average person or even a shinobi could stand next to. Just being in the same room with her made people feel bad. Mostly because she didn't know how to use her power. She didn't realize how little she could actually do about it, which was a puzzle on its own. It's not like she couldn't control the finer parts of her powers, because she could. But it was hard for her to keep her power in check, and that scared people. It would be like he or Sasuke were carelessly walking around with their chakra on the ground. He would have to talk about it with her. Still, he wanted to have fun with what was going on, so he did. Naruto looked at the group in front of him with a smile on his face before he spoke. Everything all right? After a moment of silence, one of the men, who was a pretty important business prospector who wanted to grow his railroad business, spoke up in a nervous way. You didn't feel that power. The hero of the 4th Shinobi War raised his eyebrows again and looked confused. What do you mean? I didn't feel anything. The man sputtered for a moment when the Nanadame Hokage said something. That power, it shook the village. He turned away from the blonde cage and looked at his other friends. I'm not going crazy, am I? His friends and colleagues nodded their heads with varying levels of fear and doubt. Naruto thought the whole thing was funny. Well, whatever it was, I'm sure it's being taken care of, he said with a casual wave of his hand. Come now, we have a lot to talk about when it comes to your business. The last train I rode, I had to save the country it was in. Let's hope I don't have to do that again. Thank you for your time, Hokage-sama. The businessman bowed low, and his employees and other business partners did the same. Thank you for everything you've done. We at Zeta Corp. Naruto slowly got to his feet. He towered over the others and gave them a small smile as he did so. It was my pleasure, and I hope your business does well and that more people use this mode of transportation in the years to come. As the group left, the blonde Cage shook the man's hand. After the group left the office, he stopped smiling and spoke quietly. Follow them, he said softly to what seemed to be no one. I don't believe them for a second. Take a team with you and keep an eye on them for the next few months. Send me updates every 2 weeks, and if you find proof, you have my permission to kill them. After he was done talking, a shinobi seemed to appear in front of the blonde man out of thin air. The shinobi was not very tall and had black hair with spikes. Unlike most ANBU masks, which feature animals, theirs was completely blank. Permission to recruit outside of the grid, Hokage-sama, the shinobi asked politely. Naruto turned away from the shinobi and looked at the village. Pick any 4 people you want. No more. Hi, Hokage-sama, said the shinobi. After that, he seemed to just disappear. The blonde Cage kept looking at the village for a few minutes. He was aware that Sasuke was in the room, and Sasuke was aware that he was aware. Sasuke finally spoke out, "They are brave." He slowly walked over to where Naruto was standing, where he stood next to the man and looked out over the village. Naruto took a quick look at the Uchiha before crossing his arms over his chest. To have the nerve to come straight to me, it seems like the rest of the world no longer fears us. The person who used Rinnegan was quiet for a few seconds, then he shook his head. The time of shinobi is almost over, Naruto, Sasuke said after narrowing his eyes for a moment. Our family will die if things stay the same. After a moment of frowning, Naruto raised his eyebrows. I am well aware. If you know, then you know what will happen when those robot Satsuki finally come to visit. Sasuke's Rinnegan glowed for a moment as he looked straight at Naruto. The world can't help, and we'll be on our own. Naruto turned his head toward his brother and looked straight into the man's eyes. We don't need help, because they will be beaten. Before Sasuke broke it up, the 2 strongest men in the elemental nations looked each other in the eyes. We should be the ones to look for them, he quietly suggested. Naruto let out a quiet sigh as he looked back at the village. We don't even know where to start. How do you think we can do that? Kaguya doesn't have the information we need. Sasuke didn't say anything back and just kept looking out into the village. Naruto asked quietly what happened. After a moment of silence, the Uchiha spoke. An outburst of emotion. Naruto nodded silently and then let out a sigh. Her regret keeps getting worse. Before he spoke, Sasuke looked at Naruto out of the corner of his eye. Do your job. When he heard what was said, Naruto's eyebrow twitched in irritation. He asked in annoyance, don't you have a daughter to raise? Sasuke's face turned into a small grin, and then he ran away quickly, leaving Naruto alone. Naruto grumbled to himself, I hate Uchihas, while his own ANBU team kept an eye on him. Kaguya let out a quiet sigh of happiness as she sank into her scalding hot tub. Because the water was so hot, a small cloud of fog filled the whole room. Long hair fell out from under the woman as she put her head on the edge of the porcelain tub. Her eyes slowly closed, and she let out another sigh of happiness. Relaxing, comforting, the goddess with horns ran her fingers carefully along the walls of her fancy tub. A gift from her lover, one that he was more than happy to make for her. She loved it a lot, even though, in her opinion, it was way too big. At least 5 people could fit in this tub without much trouble. Naruto was always willing to go the extra mile for her, always giving her gifts, little things, and love. He was, well, there wasn't a single word that could say what Naruto was. Understanding, loving, having empathy, being kind. He was himself, and she loved that part very much. Kaguya felt 2 rough-skinned hands on her shoulders. As their hands worked on her muscles, she let out a sigh of thanks. Excuse me, my love, but my guests took their time going over all the benefits this deal would bring to Konoha. Naruto said with a chuckle as he dug his thumbs into the woman's shoulders. They put honey on top of their words, but I could feel the poison hiding in the cracks. Kaguya's hands gripped the edge of the tub, and she let out a small sigh of thanks. I'm sure everything will work out, right? By all the gods, he had hands like heaven. Naruto gave a small laugh before answering. Sanji is keeping an eye on them, and if anything goes wrong, he will take care of it. It took a lot of work for the goddess to answer without moaning, but she was able to do it in the end. She asked in a slightly breathy voice, how are you so good at this? The blonde man laughed out loud again when the woman asked him a question. Lots of practice. Iro-Senin took me to a lot of brothels on our training trip, he said with a soft smile as he thought back on his time with Jiraiya. He said it was for business, and I thought he was lying. But it turns out that brothels do share a lot of information. As her lover talked about his past, Kaguya's eyes slowly opened. She sat still while he talked, enjoying the sound of his voice and the way he spoke. At the time, it was kind of embarrassing, but a lot of the women who worked there hit on me. I was always pretty nervous around women, never knowing what to say or do, afraid I'd say something stupid or dumb. Naruto let out a small laugh, which made Kaguya's lips curl up at the corners. I knew I wouldn't use their services, so I thought I could at least help them in other ways. It took some time, but I got pretty good at giving massages. As he talked, though, a sour look came over his face, but they always managed to mess with me, teasing me about where my hands could go and other sexually related nonsense that was too much for me at that age. Naruto gave Kaguya a soft smile as he ran his hands over her skin, but he said it slowly and softly before he got down on his knees and whispered into one of Kaguya's ears while lightly kissing her neck. It's one of the things I'm good at. At her lover's feet, Kaguya's hands broke the porcelain rim of the tub. Suggestive tone. As the man laughed and pulled away, a healthy blush broke out on her face. Why your way too? Naruto ran one of his hands over her wet skin before lovingly stroking her neck. He put his arm around his lover and looked straight into her pale eyes. If you want me to, I could be a lot more. When Kaguya looked a little embarrassed, the cheeky smile tugged at his face. Taking advantage of the fact that she was embarrassed, he leaned in and gave her a soft kiss on the lips, which she returned. Naruto tried to get away, but the woman grabbed his shirt and stopped him. His blue eyes looked into hers with a little bit of confusion. Then, his eyes grew wider as he was lifted off his feet. The Nanadame Hokage was in the air for less than a second before the hot water in Kaguya's tub sucked him in. Before Naruto came up, a second had passed, and he sputtered a little at what his lover had done. He then wiped the steaming hot water off his face as he looked straight into Kaguya's amused eyes. Be careful, my love, the floor is wet. When the woman said something funny, Naruto blinked once and then narrowed his eyes. You do know you're naked and wet, right? I'm the only one in charge here. Her response, then use your strength. Naruto blinked when the woman answered, because he didn't really expect it. After Naruto got over his initial shock, he put his arms around the woman and stood up to his full height. As Naruto and Kaguya looked at each other, water ran down both of their bodies. Kaguya's legs wrapped around her lover's waist as she crossed her arms behind his neck. Her face was the color of a tomato, and warm water was still dripping slowly off of her naked body. It had been a long time since she had shown so much of her body to someone. She was out in the open for Naruto to see, and just thinking about that made a fire start growing inside her. Naruto was seeing her whole. Embarrassment, anxiety, apprehension. She hadn't seen this before. Before any of those feelings could come over her, Naruto's lips touched hers. His rough hands moved down her back and tightened around her waist. Kaguya let out a small mewl of happiness when he touched her, and then she closed her eyes. Her fingernails, which looked like claws, dug into the man's back while her legs were locked around his waist. You're so beautiful, Kaguya, Naruto said. The woman opened her eyes and saw the loving look on his face. All of the worry, all of the concern, the worry, the not knowing. As she looked into his loving eyes, all of those feelings just went away. The man who knew everything about her. The one person who knew everything about her. The person who she enjoyed. I am yours, Naruto, she said. Lemon Sen deleted. Read chapter 2 for that. The new age was the well. That's confusing, Kaguya thought quietly to herself. Her all-seeing eyes looked at the village of Konoha, taking in the beautiful lights and glorious sights. Naruto said that the village had grown by almost 8 times its original size since the end of the Fourth Shinobi World War. An entire nation was built on the foundation of peace and prosperity. It was a big plan for the clans who were in charge at the time, when children killed other children for fun. A time when men killed women to stop them from having more children who would be raised to fight battles they didn't understand. Humans have always had a sense of self-righteousness. They were so proud that they could rival her own family, which is saying a lot. While her clan and race could back up what they said, humans could not. More bark than bite, as the old saying went. Humans were fragile things, broken by the smallest things and prone to horrible acts of violence and cruelty if given the chance. That was the main issue and focus of her thoughts. If humanity was as bad and corrupt as she thought it was, then why was she so set on protecting and caring for it? Whatcha thinking about, Haim? The love of her life finally made himself known. She didn't have to turn around to see that he had a curious look on his face and blue eyes that were full of care and love. He had been watching her for about 30 minutes, happy to let her ponder and think. For that, she liked it. With his ability to pick up on bad feelings, no one could blame her for being cross when it came to the boundaries of the heart and mind. Kaguya really loved the man, but there were times when she just wanted to wallow in her misery without having to worry about her caring and worried husband. Maybe she was still a little strange in that way. No sane person could enjoy being unhappy all day long. She gave a soft sigh and shifted quietly, her hands moving from where they had been on her lap. She turned toward her beloved and motioned for him to join her on the mountain ledge, which he did without question. She knew him to be a loyal and loving man, so when he plopped himself down, he almost fell into her lap because he wasn't paying attention. But she knew the truth. He was trying to get a reaction from her, but she didn't like his childish tricks. A moment of silence passed as the newlyweds looked down into the huge village. A gentle breeze blew through the mountainous monument, ruffling the goddess's hair. Kaguya was curious about what the average person thought was real. It was an odd train of thought, but she really wanted to know if people who couldn't use their chakra knew how much weaker they were than shinobi. She may have been unnecessarily mean to them and even prejudiced against them in some ways, but that's just a mistake she learned from her upbringing. After seeing your sister get eaten for being weak, would you want to be normal? To be thought of as weak and lower? Nay, no, never again. But her lover was looking right at her with his head tilted and an eyebrow raised. If she didn't answer soon, she'd have to play a game that Wanino Yamanaka called 20 questions. How weak you humans are, she said as she looked down at the huge village and watched the people wandering around aimlessly. Something she wanted like nothing else. Naruto's already raised eyebrow got even higher when he heard the answer. He then leaned his body toward her and wrapped his left arm around her shoulder to pull her up against him. Kaguya gave him the right to do so. And no, she didn't blush at the touch, nor did she make a weak sound because of what he did. Anyone who said otherwise would die quickly at the hands of her all-killing ash bones. That's an interesting way of thinking. What makes us so weak, Kaguya-chan? He asked with no anger in his voice. No judging, no annoyance. Just curious. The goddess was quiet for a short time as she thought about his question. You break easily, you choose to be less when you can be so much more. You choose to stay the same instead of growing. And it's frustrating to watch. There was a hint of anger in her words. She hadn't meant for it to happen, but she had been thinking about it for centuries. Kaguya just couldn't understand. Naruto was quiet as he took in the information. As he and his wife looked down at the village, a quiet hum came from his throat. For the next 5 or so minutes, there was a short period of silence while the blonde carefully looked for the right words. Because we're people, he said so simply and with such certainty. From the look of irritation on Kaguya's face, it didn't help her much. If you wanted to irritate me, you did it, she said with a tone that was both sarcastic and acidic, right on the edge of anger and frustration. If they were somewhere else, Naruto would have made fun of her, attacking her with a sly comment that would get him a tongue lashing from the royal woman. But he knew it wasn't the right time. Whether she knew it or not, Kaguya was moving toward a dangerous edge. These were the same ideas she had when she made her plan to rule and dominate the whole world. Naruto didn't think she'd suddenly change back to her old form and keep trying to drain chakra from the world. But it was better to be safe than sorry. After all, Kaguya was an alien who came from a race of beings with strange and disturbing ideas. I didn't mean to be rude, Haim, he said honestly, putting his hand on the woman's shoulder. As humans, we have no need to be seen as the strongest or most powerful. We are born small and weak. With that, her husband turned his attention back to the village and watched as people went about their daily lives. And we die, small and weak. Our life is short. The longer we live, the more we actively die. He stopped for a moment and then turned his attention to a certain family as they walked through one of Konoha's main markets. Being a person, he paused again and gently rubbed her shoulder. There's nothing grand about it. If you ignore the circumstances of your birth, you'd see how much you're like us, he said softly as he turned his head to look into her eyes with no pupils. Contrary to what many people think, no one is born with a predetermined destiny that tells them what they can and can't do in life. The only person who can tell you what you can and can't do is yourself. Not fate, not some god, and definitely not an ancient race of murderous aliens bent on taking over the world. At the end, his tone became a little sly, and he gave a small smile, one that made the woman smile for a short time. She would still say that it never happened. Putting Naruto's ego through more growth would only hurt him. She would never stop hearing about it. If you still don't believe me, all you have to do is look at yourself, he said when Kaguya didn't respond. You're an Otsutsuki, which is a race of beings that wants to become something beyond what humans can understand by eating all life in the universe. But here you are, married to a lowly human that you think is weak. Here, at last, was Kaguya's answer. She made a scoffing sound, and her eyebrows went up. You are clearly different in that way, and sure even the elders would respect you for how strong you are. Naruto laughed at her words and rolled his eyes. I'm not sure if that means I should be flattered or insulted. Kaguya replied in a tone that was so snobbish and full of pride that it almost dripped with it. Give thanks, ho, said the Hokage in a playful way. Look at you. You're making jokes. I'm so proud of you, Haim. He pulled the woman into his chest, moving her horns out of the way so he could stroke her head. Kaguya did not hiss. She also didn't growl like a wild animal. They would never do that. She was a princess, strong and powerful. To get down to his level would be to admit defeat and to be less than him. Grrr, stop being so stupid. Let go of me, heathen. She yelled in a very unladylike way as she tried desperately to get her husband's hand off her crown. Curse you, give up my hair or I'll suffer. Naruto's smile grew as he gave the woman what she asked for, but only for a little while. He did like making her look bad every once in a while. Kaguya was surprised by how quickly Naruto's hand wrapped around her stomach and almost pulled her into his lap. His other hand wrapped around the goddess right away and caught her. Kaguya, who was always very elegant and proper, got a very red face when she saw what was going on. What are you doing there, Naruto? He didn't pay attention to what she said. Instead, he pulled the woman closer to him and stroked her stomach in slow circles. He lowered his head, being careful of her horns, and whispered in one of her ears. He told them to be quiet and shush. Kaguya wouldn't be so easy to catch under normal circumstances. Even though she was a princess, Kaguya still respected power. Not as much as her clansmen, but when a strong man, like her husband, told her to do something, it got done. So, the goddess with the horns kept quiet as her lover gently caressed her body. Her pale cheeks were almost bright red. As Naruto continued to caress the woman, the silence went on for what seemed like a long time. He whispered to her as his lips came close to her ear. The mighty and powerful goddess brought low by a mere human. His tongue circled around the lobe of her ear, making Kaguya's body shake violently. But I'm nothing but a weak person, right? Kaguya wanted to argue against what he said, deny it, and explain how he was different from everyone else. Naruto's hands gently moved over her stomach, making her eyes close and sending tremors through her body. Kaguya replied in a breathy tone with a throaty gasp. I am kidding, my love. It was nothing more than a slip of judgment. When Naruto's hands finally stopped, she let out a quiet sigh. As she closed her eyes, a drop of sweat almost fell from her forehead. Slowly, her racing heart slowed down and she was finally able to rest. It didn't last long, though, because Naruto played with her robes. As her husband tore a big hole in her clothes, her white eyes popped open in shock and horror. The bitter bite of the cold air brushed across her pale skin, giving her goosebumps. If she thought her heart was beating quickly before, it was even faster now. And Naruto, she yelled, and her hands moved to cover her body. She soon found out, though, that something was stopping her from moving her arms and legs. Her white eyes shot down and she saw a thin shadow holding her in place around her body and wrists. Naruto whispered, SHH, and the chakra leaked out of his body to hold Kaguya back and keep her hands tied. Should I show you just how powerful I am? As her wrists were pulled further back, causing her back to arch almost painfully, the pale beauty only grunted quietly. She could now look at her husband from her arched position. She watched him with a mix of lust and shock. She squeaked, in public, here. We can't be here. It's... Naruto's face broke into a smirk that made Kaguya shiver. It was a smirk that showed his teeth. What is it? He asked as his fingers started to move up her stomach, over her bare ribs, and dangerously close to her soft breasts. Kaguya fought the urge to cry out in pain. As she got ready to answer, she let out a high-pitched whine. It's not right. She blew out a breath and turned her head to the side, her face burning with shame. Yes, Naruto asked, what was that? As he squeezed Kaguya's breasts roughly. Kaguya couldn't stop herself from crying out. It was a high-pitched and shrill sound. She didn't think about the pain or the pleasure when she answered her husband's question. As someone will see us, she let out a big breath as Naruto gently moved his fingers down her chest and back to her stomach. Good girl, he said softly, running his fingers down her back until, Naruto, this is against the law. A new, calm voice came into the clearing. It belonged to a certain two-eyed jerk who made a living by stabbing anything that moved. When Kaguya heard Sasuke's voice in the clearing, her eyes almost popped out of her head. As she tried harder and harder to get away, she felt almost 10 times more embarrassed. Naruto wouldn't let her move, so it was all for nothing. Naruto, she yelled, struggling against the chakra that was holding her back. Naruto gave a quiet sigh and then let go of his wife while making sure her body was out of sight. It took Kaguya a few seconds to fully cover herself again, in part because Naruto had messed with her robes in a rude way. The goddess with pale skin pulled her robes tight around her body, dropped to her knees, and refused to turn around. She felt bad enough as it was. Sasuke said in a bland voice, I'm sorry to interrupt your private time. If you want to keep going, I suggest you do it at home. Naruto rolled his eyes, then rubbed Kaguya's back and kissed the top of her head. After being caught doing something private, he knew she wouldn't add anything to the conversation. She was always and only a private person. Tonight, he would make it up to her. Yeah, what do you want? Naruto stood up slowly and walked over to his brother who had wandered off. Sasuke looked at Kaguya on purpose for a moment before he turned back to Naruto. He didn't say a word. He had no reason to. Naruto immediately got what he was trying to say. They attacked after almost a week. Kaguya took a slow stroll through one of Konoha's many markets. In her left hand, she held an old-fashioned basket made of twine and wood. It held a variety of food and ingredients. It had been a long time since she had been in Konoha. It had been almost 2 years since Naruto opened her seal to kill Momoshiki. It seemed like only yesterday that she was afraid to even go outside. Now, she no longer cared about what people thought of her. She didn't run away from the hate and fear anymore. It wasn't that it didn't bother her, because it still did. It was just that she had learned to deal with it. Naruto believed that people should forget and forgive. But her husband was a rare case in that way. Most people couldn't just forgive and move on. It was hard enough for people to believe she existed, let alone know that she was behind many of the bad things that happened in their world. Kaguya didn't really blame the people for not liking her. She would do the same thing if she was a weak person who couldn't stand up to the god who once wrecked their land. She didn't blame them for how they felt, but that didn't mean she would put up with bad behavior. There had only been one time when someone had been so stupid as to try her patience. It was better if they didn't say much. The goddess was lost in thought when she heard a voice she knew. Kaguya-chan. The goddess opened her eyes when she heard a woman's voice. She turned her head to the side and saw a curvy blonde woman. Yamanaka-san, she said politely, nodding her head to greet the pretty woman. No, Kaguya-chan. Ino whimpered playfully as she slowly waded towards the pale woman. Always so formal. If it had been someone else, Kaguya would have turned her nose up and ignored the person. She did, however, like being with Ino. The woman was a free spirit. She didn't care how other people saw her and wasn't afraid to say what she thought, no matter what other people thought. Kaguya was jealous of what the woman had. It is what's expected of me, Kaguya found herself saying, speaking in a bland tone. The answer that Ino gave was a raised eyebrow. Kaguya wanted to laugh at them. Of course, why did she forget? Yamanaka was a woman who looked into how the mind works, an expert in the dealings with the human psyche and brain. She was so good at figuring out what people thought and did that it was scary. It was one of the many things Kaguya liked about the woman. I'll bite. Who expects you to act like that? I don't think Naruto cares if you're prim and proper like a queen or not, said the beautiful woman, shrugging her shoulders and cocking one hip as she spoke. And I don't think you give a rat's ass about what most people think. Correct as usual. This woman could get on my nerves sometimes, not because of who she is, but because of what she does. She hated how easy it was to pick her apart. It made her think of her clansmen way too much. Kaguya was quiet for a few seconds before she finally let out a sigh. A force of habit, she said. Her words were far away and even resigned. We're lucky that Ino didn't push. Instead, she was interested in her makeshift basket. What are we having for dinner? Kaguya blinked at the question before replying impulsively. Oh, I'm sorry. Are you going to join us tonight? Her regal voice had a hint of snark that even surprised Kaguya. Ino's eyes widened for a moment, but then her face changed to one of surprise. She answered by nodding her head and making a happy face. Ooh, sassy. I like it. Is Naruto's sarcasm finally getting through to people? Kaguya was shocked for a moment, but then her face went blank. Cease thy foolishness. It was merely a slip of the tongue. Ino giggled quietly as she leaned against one of the stalls set up in the marketplace with her back to it. She stood up a little before putting her bottom on the wooden stall. She didn't care that the stall owner was still looking at her. Didn't necessarily mind. Kaguya's eyes nearly rolled as she spotted the man's hungry gaze upon Ino's derriere. Men were such simple creatures. She looked back at Ino, but all she got was a smile from her. Kaguya thought, of course, and rolled her eyes. The little brat was always showing off her body. She liked to be the center of attention, and she didn't care who knew it. She liked it when everyone, both men and women, looked at her. You know, said Ino in a low voice, if you showed off your skills more often, Naruto might take you out in public. Just thinking about doing something so scandalous for attention made Kaguya's cheeks burn. She almost choked right then and there, but she took a deep breath to calm down. I don't have to go to such embarrassing depths to get my lover's attention. When Kaguya said something, Ino's smile got even bigger. Oh, but why is that so embarrassing, Kaguya-chan? Kaguya answered the woman's question without thinking about what might happen if she did. I'm not a concubine to be used only for physical pleasures. Kaguya realized her peril too late. Now, Ino's eyes were shining like that. The Yamanaka's grin was practically sinful. But that's the fun part, Kaguya-chan, Ino said, and before Kaguya could stop her, she went on. Just picture it. Naruto bends you over and she points to an empty alley to her left over her shoulder. That alleyway and beats you up. You're in public, and people are all around you. You want to moan, but you can't. The woman's eyes seem to almost grow manic as her grin grows larger. So all you can do is bite your lips and cover your mouth with your hands so you don't wake anyone up. But then Naruto does the unthinkable. Ino paused for effect, and Kaguya leaned in to hear what the woman would say, despite the fact that her cheeks were burning. He pushes your face against the dirty walls of the alleys and pulls both your arms back. Now you can't even cover your cries with your hands. You're completely at his mercy as he beats you from behind. Come on, Kaguya-chan, doesn't that sound great? At the end of Ino's made-up story, Kaguya's face was on fire. It did sound wonder. No, nay, she was too good for thoughts like that. Before she could say anything, she felt a sharp pain in the back of her neck. After a second, when she felt it, her eyes got bigger. Kaguya moved faster than Ino could even imagine, and she covered the woman with her own body as a huge explosion went off below them. Then there was a terrible flash of white light, and her eardrums burst, making a terrible ringing noise. Ino's mind was racing as she tried hard to move, but she was too confused to do so. Her body wouldn't allow her to do so. Had the sudden attack made her too weak to move? She wiggled a toe. No, I'm not stuck. Adrenaline fueled her veins, ears still ringing and eyes adjusting to the darkness. Her body, it hurt so much. When she thought about getting up from where she was lying, her muscles shook very badly. As she squeezed her eyes shut, she felt like her stomach was on fire. With ringing ears, Ino made to move her arms but found that she couldn't. What was going on? Next thing she knew, a bright light was shining right in her face. She jerked her head away from it because it made her cringe. That was a mistake because it made things worse. The side of her head hurt like it was on fire. As she banged her head against loose debris, she could no longer stand the ringing in her ears. When Ino opened her eyes again, she could see the shape of something white. From what she could see, the thing was directly above her. She kept blinking as if she didn't understand. Definitely a concussion. Why did she feel so sleepy? A nap would be good. Yeah, that sounds good. As she began to close her eyes, a burning pain blazed around her face followed by something wet and cool. Ino's eyes finally managed to make out the white blue above her. It was Kaguya. Her lips were moving rapidly and her face was pinched in worry. What went wrong? Why was Kaguya so worried? Senpai, Benji, Tzoin, TBOY. Ino blinked once before everything went black. A splendid day for death and chaos. How he loved slaughter, mindless killings and displays of violence. Ants, the lot of them. What Kaguya seen in these monkeys was beyond him. But this is the start. No, Kaguya had to pay for her actions. She couldn't be allowed to live after what she's done. She'd be consumed, and if he was lucky, he'd probably get first priority over the majority of her power. Ishiki was a hard ass, but he did know how to haggle with the best of them. Should he kill Kaguya quickly, strike her down before she could react? Or should he prolong her suffering, break her body and destroy her mind, force her to watch as he gutted that blonde monkey she had laid with? The possibilities were endless. Landing softly upon the charred ruins of what these mongrels used to provide for themselves, the pale-skinned man slowly made his way towards his cousin's position. Pupil-less, white eyes lazily focused upon the smoking crater that he had created. He could sense Kaguya and some unknown monkey in it. It seemed as if the unknown monkey was currently dying, if the dimming life force was anything to go by. A 2-for-1, it must be his lucky day. A translucent gourd of red chakra emanated from his right hip, pulsating with chaotic chakra. The pale-skinned man reached into the chakra hours before pulling out what appeared to be a fish hook, bathed in the same hue and chakra as the gourd itself. The man then proceeded to lazily swing his odd weapon of choice, ignoring those around him who had survived his initial attack. He could sense dozens of chakra signatures zipping and moving around him. He ignored them like the trash they were. If they wished to save their monkey companions, then he'd allow it. He was a merciful individual, after all. As he got closer, he finally spoke. Kaguya-chan, come out and play. There was silence for several seconds as the pale-skinned man stood near the edge of the gigantic crater he had created. Annoyance seeped into his veins as Kaguya remained silent, all but ignoring him as she focused on whatever it was down there. He'd show her what happens when you ignore him. The man began to spin his fish hook at a rapid pace, practically eviscerating the surroundings with the wind currents he was generating. A moment later, he proceeded to launch the hook towards Kaguya, intent on spearing her through the throat so he could drag her to him. Soon after, there was an explosion where he had thrown his hook. Before he pulled out his chakra hook, he smirked in a haughty way. When he realized he wasn't dragging Kaguya to him, he was being dragged. His eyes got very big. It happened so quickly that the man had almost no time to get ready for the impact. Soon, his face was touching the ground, which caused an earthquake that was felt for miles in the village. He'd had that feeling. That stung. What was wrong with that? The anger and rage Kaguya felt did not show on her face. As she looked down at Ino, her eyes were empty. Her, if she dared to call the plump woman her friend, was lying on the ground and taking shallow breaths while holding her lower abdomen. In the end, protecting Ino saved her life, but the 3 feet of rebar that was sticking out of her stomach would make sure she didn't. Kaguya got on his knees next to Ino and cut the upper rebar that was going through her body. The unconscious woman let out a whimper of pain, which made Kaguya even more angry. Her hands shook for a second before she stopped them. No, she couldn't be mad at the moment. She needed to keep her cool and not panic. If something went wrong, Ino would die. Even though it took longer than Kaguya would have liked, she was able to get Ino off of the rebar in the end. She stopped the woman from bleeding quickly by putting her hand on her stomach and sending her chakra through her body. Naruto's gentle reminder, "Easy, don't do too much or you'll kill it," kept playing in her head. You have perfect chakra control. All you need to do, Haim, is direct it. Kaguya let her mind settle while she worked to heal Ino. It took less than 10 seconds for Ino's skin color to start to even out. Sweat mixed with blood and dirt poured down her body. She'd be fine, though. She'd be okay. Kaguya-chan, come out and play. When she heard the familiar man's voice, she felt a wave of white-hot anger rush through her body. A person who scared her when she was younger. A person she hated with all her heart. Urashiki. As Kaguya looked at Ino's body, her blank eyes made her look almost dead. By putting her palm on the woman's body, Kaguya opened a way for the woman to leave. A second later, it ate the blonde woman and then disappeared from reality. The goddess slowly stood up, ignoring the blood on her hands and feet. Friend who got her white robes dirty. She was about to lose control of her anger, and the only thing that kept her from doing so was knowing that if she did, Konoha would become nothing but a barren wasteland. No, definitely not. She wouldn't lower herself to his level. Kaguya knew the attack was coming before it happened. This clear hook of chakra sped through the air, splitting it and sending shockwaves of power through it. The horn goddess just tilted her head and didn't pay attention to the hook as it flew by her, missing its target by less than an inch. A second later, Kaguya grabbed the string and wrapped it around her wrist in a smooth motion. She felt the pull and was blown away by how strong Urashiki had become. He almost got her to come closer to him. Almost. Kaguya pulled on the thread without looking and made Urashiki come to her. Her cousin jumped from the top of the crater because he didn't expect the difference in strength. With hollow eyes, Kaguya swung Urashiki through the air and then slammed him straight into the ground, causing an earthquake that blew up the rubble and debris. The impact made the village shake very hard, and people yelled at the show of strength. There was a lot of silence after Kaguya did what she did. With her short action, she had just put the man down. Since he hadn't said anything yet, she thought he thought she was weak. He had nothing but garbage under his foot. Kaguya felt bad for the man. He'd die in vain just like his brother. She'd be sure of it. But right now, she was going to go slowly, take him apart, and rage him. She would only kill him if he lost his mind. After all, he deserved nothing less. Oh, but he finally started to move, didn't he? Best to stop that right away. Kaguya didn't move so much as she blurred. From where I was standing, all I could see was a violent shockwave that created a wind cyclone. As she kicked Urashiki straight through the Hokage monument, Kaguya enjoyed hearing him grunt in pain. His body was shot through the mile-high mountain, destroying it, and then came out of the other side. Good. He was far enough away from the village that it wasn't in danger. She could now let go. She saw the crumbling mountain that had possessed the previous leaders of Konoha before she went through a portal and disappeared. The only carved face that was still there was that of Naruto's surrogate mother, Tsunade. Kaguya looked at the woman's face for a moment before giving a satisfied nod of the head and disappearing through the portal. The woman slowly stepped out of the portal, coming just a few feet in front of a prone Urashiki. The man was coughing hard and slowly getting up on his knees while taking short, shallow breaths. Urashiki exhaled harshly, wiping the drool that fell from his mouth. "You'll pay for that, wretch." When she heard the exclamation, Kaguya just tilted her head and slowly lifted her left knee. Her arms and hands slowly crossed over her body in a way that Urashiki didn't recognize as a fighting stance. The woman's right palm was centered away from her body, and her left hand was clenched near her hip. The woman's left leg dug a trench in the ground, making a half-circle groove, before coming to rest next to her right foot. The goddess put her weight on her right leg and looked at Urashiki as if she didn't know what to say. Urashiki looked disgustedly at his cousin. "What kind of fighting is this? You're ruining our tradition by using such weak methods," Urashiki said with a sneer before he laughed. Okay, I'll give in to you, little rabbit. I'll have fun crushing you. Urashiki took a position that Kaguya was all too familiar with. She and her sister had been hurt by Urashiki's fierce style of fighting for a long time. He would beat them until they were bloody and bruised, and then he would spit on them. She would have fun breaking him. Urashiki came at her quickly, his right hand shooting for her throat. Kaguya didn't change her face as she twisted her palm around his attack and grabbed his forearm. She moved toward Urashiki and hooked her foot around his ankle while turning her hips. Kaguya's left heel dug deep into the ground as she struck out with the hand that had stopped Urashiki's first attack. The speed made Urashiki's eyes widen, and before he could prepare for the attack, Kaguya's palm hit him in the chest. As Urashiki fell through the rubble, blood and saliva came out of his mouth. The man flipped over and over again. He kept going until he hit a big rock, which stopped him in his tracks. As he slowly got to his feet, a violent shake shook his body. The woman's blow had made his chest physically cave in. Where did he get this incredible strength? Kaguya was never this strong physically. When Kaguya suddenly appeared in front of Urashiki, he couldn't finish what he was thinking. When he felt and saw the clear chakra around the woman's hands, his eyes grew wider. The Otsutsuki desperately crossed his arms across his chest to get ready for the blow he knew was coming. Hakusajishi Hojuki. Kaguya spoke quietly. As soon as she spoke, the clear chakra in her palms turned a brilliant purple and changed into two fierce lions. Urashiki didn't have much time to study the technique before it was so powerful that it shot him through the earth. As Kaguya beat on his arms, more blood and saliva came out of his mouth. The Otsutsuki scratched his way out of the crater he had been put in, then growled in anger. What were they doing? How was this scum getting the best of him? She shouldn't do this. Urashiki stopped thinking when Kaguya hit him in the face and made it cave in. When Urashiki was almost thrown into the air, he lost a few teeth. Kaguya didn't want to do that. Before he could stand up, the woman whirled around behind him. Before she kicked the man back into the ground, she turned her body around and coiled her leg. As Urashiki went through dozens of meters of rock and soil, a violent earthquake shook the building's foundation. Kaguya landed very quietly. She cocked her head and started skipping backwards to avoid Urashiki's chakra blasts. As Urashiki attacked, the woman twisted, flipped, and showed a lot of flexibility and acrobatic skill. She landed gracefully, then planted her feet and clenched her fist. Before the glowing lion in her right hand roared, a second had passed. The goddess hit the ground under her, turning the whole area into sand. As Urashiki was running away, the earth was shaken by a huge earthquake. He took only 3 steps before he had to run away from Kaguya's deadly attack. Left fist, left palm, left jab, right hook, straight, cross, jab. What sort of fighting was this? This wasn't the way Kaguya did things. Urashiki rarely knew what the form and strikes were. Urashiki blocked a blow that was meant for his head. He had a mean grin on his face when he saw how open the woman was being. He made to capitalize on it before an excruciating amount of pain rocked his jaw, breaking it entirely. Urashiki yelled in anger, a faint "How?" before his vision went black again, a sign that he was buried under several tons of soil and earth. Why was she so strong? It didn't make sense. She needs to be weak, pitiful, groveling at his feet. But she put him on the back foot. Unacceptable. Urashiki let out a snarl of anger as his chakra started to go through the roof. He broke out of the tomb of earth that had buried him and shot straight toward Kaguya. Kaguya didn't seem to be able to respond to how fast things were getting. She didn't do anything as his fist got closer and closer to her face. It never hit true because Kaguya always seemed to move around the hit. Urashiki's eyes widened as the woman's hair seemed to come alive. Her white hair wrapped around his fist right away, making it impossible for him to pull away and run away. He had all but a second to glimpse into her eyes before those glowing purple lions struck his abdomen. AGHH. Urashiki threw up a lot of blood, which got all over Kaguya's lower face. Urashiki let out another wheeze of pain as Kaguya kept hitting his body. As the woman's fists blurred, shockwaves kept exploding along his body. His body would shoot back, but the woman's hair would grab him and pull him back, leaving him vulnerable to even more brutal attacks. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left then right, left then right, left then right. As she hit Urashiki's broken body, Kaguya's blank face slowly started to crack. Her face turned into a crazed smile, which was even scarier because it was covered in blood. It got into her mouth and turned her teeth a mean shade of scarlet. She didn't give a damn. Kaguya brought her right fist as far back as she could, then put a disgusting amount of chakra into it. The purple lion on her fist roared, then changed into something else and got bigger and bigger. On Kaguya's right fist was what could only be called an evil old thing. Its mouth was all messed up, and its jaw was uneven and full of crooked and jagged teeth. It had no eyes and no nose. It was the darkest black and had spikes sticking out of different parts of its head. As Urashiki looked at the chakra monster, its howl chilled him to the bone. The monster's sheer power would be enough to kill him. I hope you make it through this, Urashiki, Kaguya said quietly, her eyes wide with manic joy. It won't be fun if you die so fast, the woman said with a maniacal laugh before shoving her fist through Urashiki. It was a beautiful explosion. The old monster almost tore Urashiki to pieces. His screams of agony was like music to Kaguya's ears. It was even better because he had to heal over and over again. His flesh continued to be stripped before Kaguya released her hold on him, allowing the man to detonate against the mountains. Before being swallowed by a black chakra dome, the horned Otsutsuki destroyed the landscape and mountainside. The dome of chakra exploded a split second later, making the man's pain last longer. The destroyed landscape was quiet for a few minutes as Kaguya walked slowly toward Urashiki. Blood dripped down her face and painted her robes, but she cared little for it. The smoke and ash had long since disappeared, leaving only destruction in its wake. She knew it was coming before it did. Kaguya's eyebrows furrowed at the egregious amount of chakra resonating from Urashiki's position. He couldn't have, who knows. The rabbit goddess became hazy as she moved toward Urashiki. When she got to the man, she briefly widened her eyes when she saw how her cousin had changed. Gone were the pale white orbs that resembled her own. In their place was 2 golden orbs with a golden rinnegan on his forehead. His nails had transformed, becoming elongated talons similar to the avian creature his horn resembled. Black asymmetrical markings covered his face and legs. The man's grayish-blue hair turned snow-white, like hers, and spread out behind him in a wild way. The horn at the top of his head stuck out like wings from his head. See real horror. Urashiki scowled in a mean way. The transformed Otsutsuki blurred out of sight, causing Kaguya's eyes to widen. The woman quickly ducked to avoid the blow that would have definitely cut off her head. The goddess grit her teeth before being forced to on the defensive. Urashiki's fists blurred, producing shockwaves while upending and decimating the surrounding terrain. Kaguya weaved left, right before being struck directly in the stomach by the man. The man folded the woman right over his fist before sending her flying through the air like a rocket. Her body hopped over the ground, flipping and skipping like a stone skipping across water. Urashiki watched the woman's broken body finally come to a stop as she was buried beneath a mountain. Serves the bitch right. She was crazy to even think she could compete with him. Urashiki teased the woman, "Get up, Kaguya-chan. We're just getting started, you little wretch." He then appeared directly above the woman in a flash. As he hovered over the woman, a disgusting ball of purple and black chakra pulsed in his hands. With a cruel smile, Urashiki raised the orb above his head. "I hope you don't die from this, Kaguya-chan. It would be a shame to kill you so soon." He made fun of her words before throwing the orb at her body. It detonated a nanosecond later, causing the world itself to scream in agony at the sheer display of power. A blinding white light spanned out several miles wide, blinding anything and everything while eviscerating everything. It didn't matter if the food was organic or not. The ball ate everything that it could. Similar to what Kaguya did, Urashiki seemed happy to just look around and take pride in the damage he caused with his ability. "Oh?" He spoke curiously. "You're alive." A cruel smile formed on his face as he seemed to teleport towards the woman. Urashiki stood a few feet away from Kaguya and watched as the woman struggled to even get to her knees. Blood gathered on her broken body, and her wounds wouldn't get better. He finally understood why she was having trouble getting up when he saw what was left of her left leg. Her left leg was cut off at the thigh, and she was burned all over. Her once long and beautiful hair was now reduced to little more than frayed yarn, burned and dead. Urashiki grinned to himself as he slowly walked toward the woman, laughing loudly as Kaguya struggled to stand up or foot. "You put up a good fight," Otsutsuki said after he had changed. "But in the end, you were just as impressive as you'd always been. Weak trash that has no place in the main family." As Urashiki laughed at Kaguya, he put his talon-like foot on top of the woman's head and slammed her head into the ground, nearly splitting her skull in two. "I'm going to enjoy tearing you apart. And when I'm done, I'm going to make you watch as I do the same thing to that blonde monkey you seem to like." That seemed to get a reaction out of the broken woman. Even though she was almost defeated and her left hand was broken and missing 3 fingers, it held on to Urashiki's ankle with frightening strength. Urashiki looked down at the broken and beaten woman and said, "Eh." He watched as her body shook and trembled. He made an ugly face as his other foot rose and then landed on the woman's head again, pushing her deeper into the ground. "Don't like that, do ya? What are going to do about it, eh, Kaguya-chan?" The man continued to smash the woman's face against the earth, forcing her to let go of his ankle. Fresh, the transformed Otsutsuki raged, rearing his right foot back before kicking Kaguya directly in the ribs, forcefully making her release his ankle. She skipped along the ground until she ran into a rock, putting her back into it. Urashiki reappeared directly in front of her with his fist reared back. Urashiki hit the woman in the stomach, saying, "I'm going to enjoy making the blonde monkey suffer, and I'll make sure you're not too crazy to watch." Urashiki's fist came close to her stomach before it was stopped by force. A hand with sharp claws grabbed his wrist painfully, and Urashiki's sneer got even meaner when he realized who was holding him back. "Kill you." Urashiki's fist trembled in the woman's grasp as he responded. "Speak up, you dirty woman." Kaguya's head abruptly rose, revealing her missing Byakugan. In their place were only empty sockets with dried blood falling down her cheeks. Urashiki's eyes widened at the sight, and before he could kill the woman, her jaw seemed to snap shut and an explosion of power followed, knocking Urashiki away from the mangled woman. His transformed body skipped along the terrain before he abruptly righted himself in air, landing atop his clawed feet. Urashiki stared at the smoke that had been kicked up from Kaguya's transformation with wide eyes. How did Kaguya know that the change was happening? Who had told her? As the woman's shadow started to appear through the smoke, he started to feel a little scared. As she walked slowly and deliberately, her long hair seemed to flow behind her. Abruptly, the woman stopped moving before raising her hand and making a slashing gesture through the smoke. Urashiki's eyes widened exponentially as a wave of pain shot through his body, emanating from the left side of his body. As his golden eyes followed the light, they got bigger. His elbow, his arm wasn't there. Witness true horror. Kaguya's mocking voice echoed loudly. The woman finally deigned to reveal herself. Gone was the ceremonial robe that covered her entire body. In its place was a skin-tight black covering that seemed to cover her chest and upper thighs, practically molding against her skin with no discernible design or flair. The woman's eyes and the third eye on her forehead were both a brilliant shade of golden. The only marks on her body, which looked like tear stains, were near her eyes. The marks went all the way down her body until they briefly vanished under the black covering on her chest. It then seemed to shoot her to stretch along her arms and legs. Her old horns were now bigger and thicker, and they seemed to twist once and then curve backwards, like the horns of a ram. She used to have long, straight hair, but now it was curly and tied behind her back in what looked like a loose ponytail. The length, however, remained the same. Kaguya bent her knees and smiled wickedly as she raised her arms high above her head and slowly twirled them in front of her chest to make a circle. Her hands moved slowly, and before Urashiki could figure out what was happening, his head was cut off from the rest of his body. It looked like everything happened at once. He glimpsed something brilliant and golden that stood behind Kaguya. It was taller than her and kept coming in and out of focus, like a ghostly guardian who wanted to stay hidden. Urashiki couldn't figure out why he was seeing things backwards. Why was he staring up at his own legs? What had gone wrong? What was happening? Oh, that's not fair. A clawed foot stomped on the severed head, completely obliterating it whilst causing a cascade of blood to rain from the sky. Good riddance, oh cousin of mine. Kaguya sneered hatefully. I will see you in hell, mongrel.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.